just...
Is it from my colleague? It looks like...
Maybe. Or not? No, okay. Well, we'll leave it here at the front anyway. So if you think that jacket is yours, it can be found here. A couple of things to just say initially is that the timing, again, is quite tight today, so please make sure that you do everything on time as far as possible. And please get already a Slido up on your web browser, on your mobile phone, because we're going to be using Slido to take questions during the coming session. If you need an internet connection for that, a reminder that the network and the password is up there on the screen. Before we launch into the first session, I just would like to introduce Diana Tenea, who's going to give a quick word of introduction before, and then we'll pass straight over to Laurent, who will introduce the next session. Diana, over to you.
Thank you very much, John. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, members of ESPON family. Let me start today's program with a short intervention. My name is Diana Tenea, and I represent Romania in ESPON MC. And I should have spoken in the closure session. Unfortunately, duty calls, and I have to arrive in Bucharest this afternoon, so I have to leave soon. But my colleague Radu, you know him, will fill in for me in all the program. I hope that you keep very pleasant memories from Iași, and certainly very good experience for all the presentations and debates. And I wish you all an interesting session, for seminar today, and certainly a good trip for home. Thank you very much.
That's good.
Good morning and a very warm welcome to day 2 of the ESPON seminar. ESPON seminars are always a great opportunity for us to present you with our latest results and recommendations. And this year we really reached a peak in terms of output. And so there really are a lot of insights to inspire all of you. And it's becoming ever more challenging to present all this work. Our projects, they work for 12 months or 18 months, and there are literally hundreds of pages of results. So it's quite challenging to squeeze this into a 10-minute presentation or probably even a 1-hour presentation. So what we want to do in this session is to give you some teasers in the form of pitches, and the objective is really to invite you to find out more about these ESPON projects and their results. We will do this in the format of a pitching session, so I will invite our researchers and our partners to come and present some of the key messages from their work. And we will do this in an interactive way. So I would start by outlining the context and setting the scene for the work, and then I will present to each of them 2 challenges and ask them to respond. So the colleagues will have only 2 slides and 5 minutes to make their pitch. You will hear 13 pitches this morning, and we've divided the session into 3 blocks. So we start with the first block focusing on a European perspective and European challenges. Then we will look at particularly how we can solve local challenges. And finally, we will think about policy actions and instruments and programs that we can design that are really fit for purpose. After the end of each block of pitches, there will be a time for questions and answers. We'll be using Slido again this morning, as John was said, so please feel free to put your question through your mobile device. John will keep an eye on Slido and then put your questions to our researchers. So without further ado, let me invite our first set of colleagues up on the stage. So first of all, we have Carlos Tapia from Tecnalia for our applied research on the circular economy. We have Peter Varney from Technopolis for the target analysis on future digital health. Welcome. We have Jaume Fons from the Autonomous University of Barcelona for the applied research on green infrastructure and ecosystem services. We have Elisabeth Licogiani from VVA for the targeted analysis on cultural heritage and strategic territorial development resources. And we have Hidao from the University of Geneva and the ESPON database project. So we will start with the first block with a vision for Europe. We face common challenges: environmental, social, and economic. We are constantly striving towards a better Europe, a Europe that uses its resources in a better way, a Europe where all citizens have access to healthcare, to affordable healthcare no matter where they live, a Europe where we can all make the most of our environment, a Europe where we understand the value of our past in shaping our future. So ESPON research provides some pointers on the ways forward for our economy, our healthcare, our environment, and our cultural heritage. So in this vision for Europe, we will have a fully implemented circular economy. Resource efficiency will be key to economic activities, particularly production. Waste will be reduced to a minimum, while the value of products, materials, and resources will be maintained in the economy for as long as possible. In a circular economy, resources are used to maximum capacity and natural systems are regenerated. So this is the future, but how do we get there? Well, first of all, we need to understand how do we make the best use of a region's endogenous resources? And how do we involve the local population and local influences in the transition towards a circular economy? And also, crucially, what is the current state and potential of European regions with regards to the circular economy? So to help us answer some of these questions, I would like to ask Carlos to come and present the first pitch.
Thanks, Laurent. Thank you all for being here to listen how circular economy can support Europe to address some of the great challenges we are currently facing. So CIRCTAR has produced territorial evidence on various aspects related to the circular economy and its manifestations at regional and local scales. It has critically assessed and discussed various circular economy concepts, definitions, and interpretations. It has analyzed how territorial factors affect the circular economy under a systemic perspective. It has regionalized data on material consumption and waste generation. It has explored the sectoral expression of circular economy, including circular business models, and it has provided guidance aimed at regional and local administrations. Today, I will try to address the policy questions raised by Laurent before through two examples related to the two last points on the list, namely the sectoral expression of circular economy and the policy guidance. So what is the current state and potential of European regions with regards to the circular economy? I will try to answer this question from the perspective of employment. The maps on the screen show the relative weight in terms of employment of two sectors that could be considered enablers and to some extent also precursors of a circular economy. The map to the left focuses on circular economy materials providers group, which includes all market segments that provide materials for circular economy, including both primary materials and inputs like renewable energy and bio-based materials, and also secondary materials considered through waste management sectors. Material providers make a significant contribution already to European regional economies with around 3.3 million jobs and €500 billion in turnover. Due to the contribution of sustainable agriculture and forestry, which represent around half of these figures, material providers are concentrated in rural areas. Overall, the contribution to regional employment ranges from less than 1% up to 13% of total jobs. The map to the right focuses on circular economy technology providers. This group includes all activities that produce the necessary technical equipment and machinery for a circular economy and for material providers. It includes also the green technologies and services. It accounts for around 2.5 million jobs and almost €400 billion in turnover. It represents between 1% and 3% of regional economies. That means that it's more evenly distributed than material providers, but tend to be more concentrated in urban area and industrial areas. Circular economy technology providers are also developing more dynamically than material providers. So in general, the territorial evidence collected in CIRCTAR tells that the circular economy is relevant for all types of territories, but it is materialized very differently between, depending on local conditions. The relevance of agglomeration economies for various circular business models where critical mass is needed, for example, think about product service systems or sharing economies, suggests that tendencies towards concentration of circular economy activities are likely to occur in urban areas. So cohesion policies should articulate measures to prevent circular innovations from increasing territorial disparities. Opportunities to revitalize the economies of rural areas may emerge from the sustainable circular bioeconomy. Still, from a cohesion perspective, this transformation could produce better results if implemented in a decentralized way. For example, through small-scale biorefining instead of large facilities. In any case, a big question mark remains in relation to the deep sustainability implications of such transformation. Industrial areas are the only possible setting for several circular economy strategies, such as industrial symbiosis, remanufacturing, and so forth. Industrial regions in decline may also find opportunities related to the availability of industrial plots or factories and other facilities that could host circular processes, including both material storage and transformation. So how to capitalize on regions' endogenous resources and involve the local stakeholders? Regional and local administrations have a fundamental role to play to make circular economy transitions occur at these levels. Think, for example, of waste management policies. Ideally, policy interventions need to be co-designed with local actors, coordinated with various sectoral policies, aligned with other governance levels, and implemented in an integrated layer. This requires a great deal of policy vision and also external support. SICTAR provides guidance for the design of circular policies and strategies at regional and local levels through a stage-based approach that helps regional and local policymakers assess the local context and potential for a circular economy, define policy priorities, set out the right governance and implementation processes, and also ensure the right policy framework conditions via policy mixes and examples of good policy measures. And that's all from my side, from Circular. Thank you.
Many thanks, and thank you also for keeping to the time. So our population in Europe is aging, and many of our regions are losing people. We need a Europe with an effective, user-friendly, and widely adopted digital healthcare, where we have the right tools and services to ensure the health of our European citizens, both young and old, and to ensure that their health is improved, to ensure that healthcare quality and access is increased, so that aging residents in rural communities can continue to access the care that they need to meet their growing needs. But also so that younger urban residents can benefit from personalized medicine to mitigate, for example, the effects of a chronic illness. So where do we stand with digital health? And in particular, what are the economic and social impacts of digitalizing services in the health sector? And how can territories benefit from e-health solutions? To help us answer these questions, I would like to invite Peter to come up for the second pitch.
Thank you very much, Laurent, and thank you for the opportunity. What I thought that before we discuss the social and economic impact of digitalization of healthcare, we have a thought about the fact that the social and economic status as a determinant of population health is equally important. So there is a circularity in the question itself. So digital technology in itself is a tool or a means to deliver better healthcare. It's both integrating health and social care and personalizing. And what we have seen in our study is that in many countries, while e-health strategies are popping up as new ways of dealing with healthcare, in other parts of the world, especially in the Nordics, e-health is already part of business as usual. There is one health strategy basically for the country, and the digitalization is inherently included in it. So when we looked in our study, we had a spectrum of stakeholders, and in one end there we had Finland, on the other hand we had Bulgaria, so there was a disparity in the study itself. But the impact that digitalization of healthcare clearly shows is that the ownership of the health data of an individual creates and empowerment. Empowerment about awareness of healthy living and how that basically translates into the well-being of the individuals, so people are not expecting the healthcare system to deliver for them, but they take action. The issue around digitalization of healthcare is also about social inclusion and equity of the access to these services, and we have seen that having the physical infrastructure is only one step, having the digital literacy of the individual citizens of the others. So in the case of Laurent's vision, we have obviously more challenges in the rural aging environment to actually come up to speed, to actually exploit the potential of digital health services. But what we have seen in the study, quite a few examples how the healthcare is delivered at a higher quality level from the diagnosis all the way to therapy and longer-term care. So there is good evidence for that. The other one is the more economic aspect, and that is, can we do that healthcare in a way that is saving time and money for the professionals who deliver that care and for the overall health system, which is basically having an issue of sustainability, getting 10-15% of expenditure of an individual country. And what we have seen, there are quite a few actions taken at the European level to create that infrastructure, to defragment that type of market, to give access to healthcare providers at the European scale, and basically fulfilling the vision of the digital single market. Unfortunately, this is still a very fragmented picture, and what we need is better monitoring and more independent evaluation of these. So quickly going what benefit it can bring to territories. Territories, the local authorities are ultimately responsible to deliver health and care for their residents, and many have smart specialization strategies. But we also see the disparity across Europe in terms of awareness, acceptability and interoperability, and that's very key components of delivering health in a region. So going to the individual level, what digitalization will enable is the mobility across borders, we heard yesterday, and mobility in terms of working other parts of Europe. And the Connected Health Facility, Connected Europe Facility is actually providing countries the means to build that infrastructure. So very quickly to provide three examples. In Slovenia, for example, they created a network of regional hospitals for dealing with stroke, and that in the last 2 years already delivered services for over 2,000 patients, and it was a very effective way of making healthcare delivery more efficient. And the other one is the example of Finland's virtual hospitals, and they created that to target very specific problems, and they create a continuity of care. They have a patient pathway, and already, although it's only the first couple of years of its existence, delivers a big change in the way. In our case, we mapped diabetes, and we saw how diabetes is dealt from end to end using digital solutions. And finally, this is the future, how e-prescription and e-summary can be shared across European countries. And from January of this year, we have seen that e-prescriptions are accepted in Estonia that were issued in Finland. So it's a good first example how digitalization will help citizens of Europe. Thank you.
Many thanks. And just a reminder that you can put your questions through Slido. There will be an opportunity after we've heard the first series of pitches to discuss and to hear more from our colleagues. So our natural areas in Europe contribute both directly and indirectly to our well-being. We benefit from green infrastructure, so our green spaces, but also our blue spaces in rural and urban areas. Green infrastructure provides services that are of economic, social, cultural, and ecological value. So our forests, they provide, for example, wood for renewable energy. We use them for recreational spaces. They are part of our cultural landscape, They also regulate our supply of air, water, and minerals, and they support biodiversity. So Europe should really make optimal use of green infrastructures and ecosystem services. But in order to do so, we need to understand, first of all, what are the potential benefits of green infrastructures and ecosystem services for the development of regions and cities, and how can these effects be measured? And also, which territories can benefit the most from such potential? So to help us answer these questions, could I please ask Jaume to present his pitch?
Okay, good morning, thanks. Yeah, before we start and enter into the benefits, probably if I would ask what is green infrastructure, everybody probably has heard about that, but we'll have many different answers. And the truth is that everyone has his part of truth in this overview. What is important on green infrastructure are three elements. One is a network, so it's not scattered elements, it's a network, connected elements. Secondly, it's strategically planned. So it's not by chance that we find a forest, we find a river, that's green infrastructure. It has also a purpose and it's part of a planning. And another important element is that it's multifunctionality, so make the most efficient use of the land. So it doesn't serve, ideally, one single purpose, could serve several purposes. So what we have here on the picture, on the left side, we have, let's say, from the city, from the urban context, to the rural areas or mountains, or let's say, yeah, the less urban or non-urban areas. So also green infrastructure has a range of scales, and also in Greta we have work at urban and what we call landscape scale. And there is, let's say, a big difference between what is in the urban context and what is outside the urban context, because, of course, in the urban context, we have a dominant gray element, so any single green spot already has a value, while outside the urban areas, the green elements need to emphasize on the connectivity and also in this multifunctionality. So, on the bottom, you could see different elements that contribute to the green infrastructure. So, for example, we have wetlands, so it's not only green, also blue, a river, a lake could be a part of this green infrastructure. Green roof, now we are in the urban setting. Urban trees, of course. Then it's also interesting, I haven't talked so far about agriculture. In principle, we only included these agricultural parts or settings that have a high, what we call high natural value, that we explain in the project how to define that. But agriculture could make a lot of contribution to that in the connectivity mainly. Or, for example, as I mentioned, river and riparian vegetation. Then, so what are the benefits? So it's all of us, we hear about that. So basically, we look at, we had a broad literature review, and the benefits that have been demonstrated and quantified. So on the city level, on the urban context, it's clear the reduction of the heat island effect, also the control or reducing or air purification by absorbing some air pollutants. Also, it has some benefit in terms of health in general. And yeah, when we move outside the city, it has also more value for biodiversity, also for education, for recreation, of course, at all levels. So how did we measure that? So we have the reality, and from this reality, we extracted some elements. We extracted what we call the biophysical, where we have forest, natural, semi-natural elements. And in addition, we analyze the ecosystem services. So it's a combination of soil properties, vegetation that provide like water infiltration, capacity for protect against soil erosion, etc. And then we have this map of green infrastructure, of multifunctionality. So, and then when we move one layer up, we have the demand for ecosystem service and the supply. This is, let's say, currently a more innovative part that is still under research. So it's let's say, the less consistent, but provides an example how to do that. So how it looks, sorry. Yeah, combining all these elements, we have been able to develop a network of potential green infrastructure in Europe. At the European level, we focus on this multifunctionality for biodiversity, for disaster risk reduction, or for water management. And then we try to find which regions, this is like a scaling up, which regions have more potential to provide all these elements by the green infrastructure. And we see that it's not a consistent pattern, and it reflects the nature of each region. We see on the Mediterranean, you have a huge variety and range from Spain, Italy, or Greece. And it's because the natural assets and also the history and the management. It's important, it's then going down, and it's just open your appetite to go to the project results, and we have 3 policy briefings. Then you can, there are 8 case studies, and each case study, you could see the fine-grained results of the potential green infrastructure and what are the benefits, what are the constraints and challenges in each case. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. Cultural heritage is one of Europe's greatest strengths. It forms an integral part of the life of our citizens. It's recognized not only as a source of knowledge, social well-being, sense of belonging, and community cohesion. But it's also an essential part of Europe's socio-economic capital. The attractiveness of our regions and cities is closely linked to their cultural features and the symbolic dimension of spaces. Cultural heritage is what makes regions and cities distinctive and unique. It is something that is inherited from the past, but in many ways it's also contemporary and a living cultural resource that stimulates economic activities and spills over into the wider economy. However, whereas cultural heritage is increasingly acknowledged as a strategic and development resource, it's challenging to fully capture the significance and its impact on the economy and society. So this brings us to our 2 key questions. How does cultural heritage contribute to our well-being and our economies, and how can we measure these contributions and impacts? So to help us answer these questions, I would like to invite Ellie to present her pitch on cultural heritage.
Thank you, Laurent and everyone. Indeed, cultural heritage in Europe, not only in Europe, but certainly in Europe, is out there. We don't have to do much about it. However, this study has focused on measuring the impacts of it, or how to try to overcome issues that have to do with commonly used or not commonly used definitions, data availability, as the two main challenges that we had to deal with in this project. The project focused on the economic impact. So we have not yet gone into the impact of well-being, although it is in indirect way related to economic impact. But there is upcoming work and upcoming studies of ESPON that are going to focus on well-being as well. So what the objective of this project was to focus on 9 countries and 10 regions, and try to find ways, explore ways on how to measure the impact of cultural heritage. Why do I say explore ways? Because in different countries we have to deal with different ways of definitions, of data collection, and we had to find a commonly used framework to put everything together. So in order to do all this, conceptually we started with a values chain approach to help us see which activities are stimulated by cultural heritage, and these activities trigger transactions that create economic impact. So we started from this. You can see here in this small graph the value chain approach that we followed. So we start from not from creation in theory, but we start from the management of it, conservation, rehabilitation, repair, renovation, that links to activities or sectors that have to do with construction, archaeology, architecture. Then we go to the dissemination of it, which is related to real estate, advertising, graphic design, exhibition and transmission, and you can see the different activities linked, consumption and use. Of course, there are some gray areas. For example, you can say, somebody could say that advertising is not strictly only dissemination, but also belongs to exhibitions. So we had to use a general frame in order to be able to identify which are the activities that create transactions that have economic impact and are stimulated by material cultural heritage. In selecting from all these activities, we have to follow some criteria. And the two main criteria we followed was the economic relevance of the impacts, but also the data availability. And data availability was an important factor. So on the left hand, you can see the sectors or activities where we have focused our impact analysis: archaeology, architecture, museums, tourism, construction, ICT, insurance and real estate, which are the three more auxiliary activities. The indicator we focused on was employment in full-time equivalence, turnover, and gross value added. I'm not going to present here specific the numerical results. The numerical results you can find in the final report of this project, which is still under development. But I would like to give an idea about what type of results came out of this study. So here is a general picture. So you can see, for example, the importance of archaeology and how this relates to effects from material heritage. In construction, we understand that not all of the effects are related to material heritage. You can see, however, that 10% of the employment impacts of construction come from material heritage. So if we consider the size and magnitude of the construction sector, which is quite big, we can see that the 10% is quite important. In general, tourism and construction seem to be the areas where we see more impacts there, yes. I will leave it here for you to see. The specific results are coming in the report, and you can see there the numbers. The two messages, however, that I would like to pass from this study, looking to the future, is going back to the first point, that material cultural heritage is out there, and it is a challenge to measure the impact of it in order to make use of this information for the policy needs. And the two challenges are to try to find ways to commonly define material heritage in the different countries in order to make sure that we have a way to measure the impacts, and create awareness among the different actors, the people who are responsible for collecting data and for sustaining heritage repositories, on how this data collection should better benefit policy design and policy advice in the future.
Many thanks. So we heard some insights on a vision for Europe for our economy, our healthcare, our environment, and our cultural heritage. But a vision without execution is just hallucination. So to properly execute policy actions towards a more sustainable and inspiring Europe, we need regional data. To perform territorial analysis and to monitor ongoing developments, data is also key. The ASPON 2020 database portal is part of our vision at ASPON to provide users more easy access to different types of up-to-date data and data-related functionalities that are relevant for territorial analysis and monitoring. The database portal makes the key indicators and related metadata that was developed through the ASPON 2020 activities available to different users. So how do we execute our vision? First of all, how do we make the database portal as user-friendly as possible? And also, how do we keep the database portal up to date? And for some answers for those questions, I'll ask our final speaker for the first block, to present us the pitch on the ESPON database.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Laurent, for these challenging questions. So, yes, we are the database portal. We are in the lucky position to take care of the ESPON's project data, the wealth of data that all the projects cherish. We are happy to see many projects delivering the data. Currently, we have 18 projects delivering the data. 10 more are upcoming. We also have the previous projects from the 2013 program. So it has been since long a debate around the database portal, what it should do. Be an archive, a memory of the project's data, be a data provider for the current projects, be also a database for the outside world. And in the end, I think it should be all of that, which is a lot, in fact. So how to make the database portal more friendly? We started with some back office work structuring the data. We are in an era of data abundance. Yesterday we talked about big data. I think this morning we will talk again a bit about big data. I don't know exactly when big data starts, with how many records, but just a few figures. Currently, we are handling more than 800 indicators. I mean, you could say data tables. We have more than 4 million single records. We are also handling more than 250,000 spatial units in the database. We see that more and more precise data is coming. We have the FUA, but we have also the LAU data. We have the gridded data. So there is really an explosion of data. So our first step to make this information more accessible is to structure it correctly. And what we did to start is to try to reduce the number of indicators. I talked about 800 indicators, but if you look at these indicators, many of them can be grouped, in fact. If you have age classes, you can have 20 age classes, which each one is an indicator in its sense, but we decided to group them as one indicator, for instance. The same for the current land cover data, where we have dozens of classes, land cover classes. We just made it one indicator. So this is an important work that we do with the projects. We try to see how the data can be grouped in this way. So in the end, now we have around 200 real indicators, I would say. Then the second step is to develop the user interface. So we are still in the process of developing it. The idea is to give a quick access to the main data. It means what the projects consider are the main indicators. That's really the main focus of the user interface. And also to give a quick access to data in a readable, machine-readable format, something that can be directly opened in a spreadsheet software or GIS software. So for the time being, we provide what we call CSV files, tables, and also GIS files. Users can also download data as bulk sets of project archives. So if you're interested in the whole data of one specific project, you can also download it this way. And then thirdly, we provide web services. It's a bit a technological way. It's more for, I would say, specialized users, but it allows the data to be directly used by third-party applications. Then the next slide. Do I have to move myself? Oh, sorry. Thank you. How to keep the data up to date? This is a very big challenge indeed. What I have to say is that for the base indicators, we are setting up a procedure, an updating procedure, which will be semi-automatic, but mainly manual, I would say, because it's really a tricky endeavor. It's also an added value as compared to the Eurostat data. We had this question, why do you provide Eurostat data? In fact, there is a real added value from the ESPON database in the terms of gap filling, consistency check, outlier detection, and all these things. So this is a real added value, but it's really a challenging task. And then, so we will update the base indicator, that come mainly from Eurostat. And concerning the project indicator, the important thing to understand is that we will not update the project indicators because it is a delivery as of the end of the projects. So we are not in a position to update the data, but we provide the methodology and the genealogy of the indicator so that a user can possibly replicate the process and the creation of the indicators. So I think it's very important to understand this aspect and the difference between the base indicator that we will update and the project indicator that we will not update. Thank you.
Can we switch over the slide to Slido, please? So we'll see which questions we've got coming in. So we've got questions to a number of the experts up on the panel that have been voted up here by the audience. So I'm going to start with the one that you can see there. You've also got the screens to the sides here if you don't want to kind of crick your neck to look behind. The top one about e-health is the most highly ranked question. Regional disparities were mentioned regarding e-health. Can you elaborate on this? Will e-health contribute to widening gaps between affluent, technologically advanced urban areas vis-à-vis poor rural regions, for example?
Well, we have certainly seen initially in the transition period some disparities of that sort, but I think the end game is that there will be full coverage of the infrastructure across the country and across Europe. I think where the struggle is today is mostly that countries simply don't have the physical infrastructure to deliver them. The second one is really about the digital literacy that I already mentioned, and this is something that is more a culture change and a shift. So I would think I'm an optimist, and I would say that no, it will not continue to diverge, but initially in the transition period, the early adopters will be the urban areas. So we probably have to have a very conscious and determined approach that rural areas catch up.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move to the second question that's on the screen there. So this is Jaume, this is for you. Green and open spaces are under multiple pressures. Climate change, urbanization, densification, intensification of agriculture. Do you include these pressures in Greta as well? No?
Yeah, okay. We included, okay, we developed the green infrastructure focusing on three main objectives: to address climate change, and disaster risk reduction, water management, and the third, these two main policies. So, for example, urban pressure was not addressed explicitly as to build green infrastructure against that, but the methodology is developed in a way that we could include, we talk about strategic planet. So we can include this element, how to build green infrastructure against, for example, urban or sprawl or development in the peri-urban. There is something important there that I didn't mention, that is in this peri-urban area probably is the most important area where we need to really focus on the green infrastructure, because it's there where is more risk of this disconnection. So partly is included because it's partly in the policies that we focus, developing and the method, the green infrastructure at European level for this purpose, but it could be extended to these other elements. There is a third element that we didn't consider, and in general is what we identify on the application is not taken into account, that we develop green infrastructure under current conditions. But what will happen in 10 years? So maybe in 10 years, some species that we are now there, or they will need to require different management because climate change, or particularly in the Mediterranean, this green infrastructure that currently we have will be a challenge, how it will survive in 10 years' time even. So this is, I think, a general challenge that it's very and will need to be integrated more and more. And currently in most practices is, okay, we define now the green infrastructure, but this element is not yet fully integrated.
Don't turn the mic off because there's one more question to you, which, because they're just being re-ranked, I've lost again. Here we go, right. So Greta has a very urban-centric perspective. How were the views of rural stakeholders included in this project?
Yeah, maybe, yeah, the picture that I showed at the beginning looked like very urban-centric, but I would say in the project we had two parts, and the biggest part is in the rural setting, is not in the urban. In fact, the urban is the smallest part. Then what we develop is basically on data and, let's say, evaluation on the real conditions. So at European level, we don't integrate views. However, when we move at the 8 case studies, in these 8 case studies, we integrate the views of the different stakeholders. And that is when we capture the potential conflicts that may arise, how it's planned. So, and the methodology that we develop at European level is we just measure what is available, what are the natural assets and the conditions. Based on that, there is a potential green infrastructure that could be delineated. And the next step would be when an area or region wants to implement is what integrate these views. And is what happened in the case studies where we get all these elements.
Right, excellent, thank you. So let's then move to the question about cultural heritage. So Elisabeth, this is for you. Cultural heritage, how does the evidence help places understand whether or not to prioritize/invest in culture? What about impacts of new/renewed cultural infrastructure on wider economic performance, e.g. creative industries, tech, talent attraction? Make of that what you wish.
Yeah. Do works?
I think so, yeah.
Do I relate it with the other?
You can have a go and answer that one as well. That's up on the the third one there too, yeah.
Yeah, I will reply for both of them, although they are quite different. This project has gone a bit higher level and more generic level, driven by the availability of data and the way that different countries are defining different objects. And this wants to say that it is very important to use the evidence in order to see what are the impacts, for example, of new cultural infrastructure. But when we're talking about EU-level comparisons, in order to be able to do this, we need to have common ways of measurement. And up until now, we have not seen that it is able to do that at the EU level, or even not full EU level, even at the level of 10 or 5 countries in the EU. The particular project we are talking about has focused on the general indicators of employment turnover and not gone into specific sectors, much more specific sectors, like the ones that have to do, for example, with new infrastructures or the creative industry as such. At the local level, that would be very useful, and I think possible to do even now. On the question, if we relate it to the question on the regulations, again, we did not do a full impact analysis of regulations, but the general feeling we get from the study study is that the regulations in heritage are driven by local needs, of course. We're talking about objects in the local economies, and of course the countries have a say, and to some extent they should have a say, but this is a personal opinion. However, when we are talking about EU-level comparisons, we need a more comprehensive way of not only defining but also of collecting data in order to be able to say something further than wish lists of how things should be or not be.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we have a question about circular economy, which is the third one that's on the screen there, now at the top of the screen. So Carlos, for you, no, they're jumping around. Now second on the screen, can we inform the promotion of circular economies without flow data and maps? If you can have a go at that question, that would be good.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for the question. It's a very pertinent one, actually. There's basically a very simple answer. We don't have that information. We don't even have that information at country level. At the time the project was completed, this information was only available at European aggregated level, so information on trades and international exchanges. We are working with the domestic material consumption indicator, which implicitly already considered imports, material imports, and minus exports, and also considered domestic extraction. Nonetheless, all these indicators, also material flows, would not consider embedded consumption of materials that take place upstream. So perhaps you are importing an iPhone, which is very light, but that telephone has a huge material footprint, which is not included in the assessment. So for that, we concluded that what really matters is final consumption. That is also the reason why we approached this circular economy from a systemic perspective, because it's not possible to look at this only from a production perspective and not focusing also on final consumption. But unfortunately, this footprint approach is not feasible at this point.
Okay, if you could pass the microphone to he, because I bring the next question to you. Could you please give an example of an estimation of missing data? The question at the top there.
Yes, first.
It's on, it's good, yeah.
Okay. I have to say that this exercise is really indicator specific and country specific. If you have demographic data or economic data, the estimation techniques or the trends are not the same, let's say. And also, in each country, you might see different trends. So it's really indicator specific and country specific. So an example, for instance, if you have a missing data at NUTS 3 level, then you can use, if you have data at NUTS 2 or NUTS 1 level, you can use the trends at the upper level to apply it at the lower level. That's just one example of how we can do this. But there are several techniques depending on data, the length of the gaps, and so forth. So it's really a case-by-case approach that we have on these estimations.
Right, okay, let's round this session off with a question there that's in the middle. Do any of the presented projects have any case studies for Romania? Do any of you got anything from Romania? No? Cultural heritage?
We do have data for Romania, not case studies though.
Okay.
But we can speak about that.
All right. So no, unfortunately, is answer for whoever posed that. I think that covers, we've talked about downsides of e-services, I think. I know, do you want to have a quick go at that, because we've got another couple of minutes. Peter, about downsides of e-services. What are Peter's thoughts on downsides of such e-services? Namely, they are frequently developed as cheaper alternatives to better systems. They can also serve to isolate and disconnect remote communities/households.
I think that fear comes from the fact that it is technology-driven, but what we see in the Nordic countries is that the technology is already available and they are moving on to user-centric approach. And my feeling is that that would avoid that disconnect that the question is asking about. It is simply a tool to coordinate better service, and it doesn't replace the human interaction in healthcare. So if that kind of coordination can be better done as a result of introducing digital health, the rural communities will equally benefit, and it will actually not get isolated. As we have seen, if regions don't have the right expertise, very quickly they can, through audiovisual means, get access to that health delivery. So my thoughts are that this is only a potential risk if the implementers are focusing on technology rather than the user.
Okay, thank you. And indeed, I still have 1 more minute to go, so I'm going to come finally then back to Jaume to answer the question. Greta, your map showed 3 ecosystem services. How did you reach this typology from the broad set of possible definitions?
Well, in fact, we used 10 ecosystem services, and this is a complete another domain of research. So the ecosystem services that we used is already available information at European level. And it's based on the MAES or MAES, that it's the European approach to ecosystem services, that it's a joint initiative of the Commission, the European Environment Agency, of course, and GRC. And basically, there is a systematic review. There is also a classification, it's called sizes, and it's follow a systematic for the provision, regulation, etc. And from that, we selected 10, well, let's say 9, and additionally another one that it's recreation, that it's more subjective, but it's important to include this aspect. And so it's already well accepted or accepted at European level. Is the best information that we have currently, so this could be improved. And with these 9 ecosystem services, we are able to link to the biodiversity, risk reduction, and and water management. And the final map, there were 3 categories that it was, we call monofunctional, bifunctional, and multifunctional. So it was not only 3. I mean, this division has some explanation there why did that, but in fact we used these 9 ecosystem services. That is the best available information at European level. I want to say that, for example, in Switzerland, that it's part of the Alpine macroregion, that is one case study, they had a really nice example how they developed such ecosystem service at more fine-grained, with a cooperation with academia, with policy making. And another interesting example is in the Aquitania Basque Iru region, that they take our methodology and they are applying with their own data. And they have better information in ecosystem services, even they are including some additional ecosystem services. So the basis is the methodology, the approach, the contextual framework, and that it could be improved with better information.
All right, that will then, we'll draw that session to a close because I'm afraid we're out of time. Also, bear in mind the complexity of that final question that we didn't much get to. Did you want to have a 30-second answer? Okay, yeah, they reckon you can do it in 30 seconds, go for it.
The answer is no. The study has not gone that far to explore causality. The reasons are 3. One is because we will need to go down to less generic indicators than employment, GVA, and turnover, and go down to far more specific indicators and also factor indicators to explain the causality. Second is that we will need a bigger pool of countries than 10 countries, and also we would need more time series in order to explore causality. I think it's a very good point for next studies and next work.
Right, excellent, super quick answers there. So that, I would like to then give all of the speakers a warm round of applause also for answering so many questions. Thank you very much indeed. So now, without any further ado, if you can leave the stage, ladies and gentlemen, we'll now then do a quick switch over, and Laurent will then introduce the next speakers. Thank you.
Many thanks to our first round of presenters. So one of our next projects has a case study from Romania. So our questioner, perhaps if you re-put the questions in the next round, you will get an answer to that. So please keep the questions coming. So for our next round of pitches, we will focus on the challenges that our local leaders and policymakers are trying to solve in communities across Europe. So could I please invite our next set of pitching partners up on stage? We have Andrea Popp of Icon Institute for Youth Unemployment. We have Laura Todaro of VVA for impacts of refugee flows to territorial development. We have Renaud Legois of UMS Riyadh for big data for territorial dynamics and housing. We have Helka Kalyumaki of the University of Turku for potential of big data for integrated territorial policy development in the European growth corridors. There's a very nice acronym for that. And we have Jason Begley of Coventry University for urban-rural connections in non-metropolitan regions. A very warm welcome to all of you to our pitching stage. So many regions and cities across Europe encounter challenges that are specific or specific to or specifically impact their territory, and that they need to address and resolve. So policymakers and practitioners take actions by observing trends, by identifying cause and effect relations, by developing specific policies to address these challenges. So for the second set of pitches, let's put ourselves in the shoes of a mayor or the leader of a local regional assembly trying to solve challenges in their community. So for our next series of pitches, we have ESPON projects that have delivered insights on how to employ our youth, how to deal with migration, how to ensure adequate and appropriate supply of housing, how to plan economic interactions with your neighbors, and how to ensure accessibility of rural areas around towns and cities. So let's start with our youth. One of the key challenges that Europe's cities and regions are facing is youth unemployment. The financial crisis of 2008 brought on significant increases in youth unemployment across Europe. And 10 years after the crisis, our youth are still more likely to be unemployed than the population at large in most European countries. Long-term unemployment for young people entering the labor market is leading to social exclusion. And youth unemployment is a serious structural challenge as labor markets are changing. So the challenges for our local leaders are, how do we foresee the skills that are needed for tomorrow, and how can we ensure that well, our general populations, but particularly our youth, have the skills that they need for the labor markets for tomorrow? And how can regions and cities really best prepare themselves for the future? So to help us with these questions, I would like to invite Andrea to come and do the pitch for youth unemployment.
Thank you, Laurent. Our project has looked at youth unemployment from the year 2000 up to 2016, so we could track basically the way regions have evolved around the crisis. The way youth unemployment has not only risen in the crisis, but the recovery curve of the region. This has let us identify basically patterns of resilience and make recommendations on how to approach youth unemployment. Of course, when looking on the skills of the future, we're going to be looking particularly at youth because if you define youth between 15 and 24 years old, these are people who are going to be active in the labor market for 40 to 50 years. It's not an easy task to try and foresee the skills they will need even in 20 years, never mind 40, 50. So the key words to look for when trying to define the future skills is the future of work. You can see the International Labour Institute, the International Labour Organization, my bad, has launched their publication, The Future of Work, in January. The European Commission, just in April, has had a huge conference trying to discuss the future of work, because it is one of the major challenges we face, because we really can't afford to wait to make these decisions. We cannot walk back the evolution of the labor markets. We have to focus on it right now. I mean, 10 years ago, if you would have asked me, I wouldn't have said it, but today we are in the future. Now, to look at the ways to approach labor market changes, of course, you're going to tell me, well, roadmap to the future is going to be made at national level. It's at national level that human capital is built and curricula are developed. That's true, but then again, at national level, it's quite hard to see the needs of specific regions. That's why regions have to look at preparing their youth specifically for their needs. We've made recommendations related to smart specializations of the regions. Regions have to look at their youth and their needs and train for particular requirements. You have to look at what you need, and you have to link your young people to that specific need in their education. SDGs and smart specialization being the best recommendations to that end. Now, how do you define skills and how do you train those skills? You have to, first of all, decide that you cannot change the curricula in 1 or 2 years and respond to the needs of your youth at regional level. So you're going to have to look at trainings. You're going to have to look at 1-year trainings or VET, vocational education. You have to look at apprenticeships, things that can be done at regional level in order to connect young people to a region's specific needs. Particularly the emerging needs that really don't have a defined place in the curricula. So investment in education, though I know it's the recommendation everybody makes, it remains the major recommendation to be made, particularly at regional level. Investment in vocational education, in lifelong learning, in pretty much the skills that allow young people to be trained and retrained, to be adaptable to the labor market, because we believe the strongest skill that the young person needs nowadays is the skill to learn. They cannot, you cannot expect to learn one skill and then use it forever, do the same job for the next 40 years. It's not going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to have to adapt, not learn a new job, but change the job you are doing now. So adaptability and ability to really commit to lifelong learning is a major direction, the skill of the future. Here we have to look, of course, at the digital economy, which is one of the major actors, one of the, even I would say automation is one of the scare words of policymakers nowadays. We don't want the robots to steal our jobs. We haven't wanted that for the last 100 years. We don't want it now. Now instead of the robot is the artificial intelligence coming to steal our jobs. But of course, that's not the case. Automation can do tasks, people can do a job. So we cannot confuse basically a robot doing some math with a person who is actually intelligently responding to a job. But again, the more tasks we give to robots, the more our young people have to learn to basically work with these robots. So that's another part of the lifelong learning. So at EU level, we are controlling the risk related to automation, to digitalization and other emerging forms of employment like the platform economy. At regional level, we have to train our youth pretty much to respond to these new forms of employment, including platform work, telework, and the additional skills they require, such as self-management and the ability to collaborate digitally and manage your own workplace. Now to go to the next slide. How we prepare our youth for the future. So these are the skills that they need, but how do we actually go towards preparing our youth to enter this future world? At EU level, again, there is Youth Employment Initiative, which finances the Youth Guarantee, and which helps pretty much young persons to find either training or work. It is a promise that they will find a good quality offer within 4 months of entering the labor market. At regional level, our project strongly recommends that these European initiatives get more flexibility. It should not be a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. They should just meet in the middle. The top-down approach has a good structure. The Youth Guarantee functions. It would be great if we could just be a bit more flexible about it at the regional level, allowing a good response and allowing it to be adapted to the specific needs of each region. Another recommendation, pretty much having a single point for youth where they can go and seek help, both with employment, with training, with adapting to a new job, and basically getting additional skills in order to face a current economy. This would help young people contact and have their needs filled. This would help us at an administrative level to see what young people need. It would centralize the effort. It would also be more visible to stakeholders, not just young people. If you put a one-stop shop on social media, your young people will see it, your other institutions will see it, and you can collaborate, and your stakeholders, your private sector will see it. Then another and very important recommendation. Okay, sorry. I have so many recommendations. All for you, please.
Thank you. That's why it's a teaser, so I think, well done. In 2015, we saw significant increases in migrants and refugees arriving in Europe. We had the war in Syria, political turmoil in Libya, but also persisting socioeconomic and political instability in countries in Africa and Central Asia. And this led to increases in asylum seekers and irregular migrant flows. Local leaders in particular are faced with the challenge to foster the social inclusion of refugees and asylum seekers. They have to avoid exacerbating local tensions. They also have to meet the economic and humanitarian needs in a way that is beneficial both to local communities and refugees. So our regions and cities have been at the forefront of the policy changes linked to migration. They are the places where effective actions are needed. So what are the policy options for managing irregular migration in Europe? And in particular, how can policy steer the distribution of asylum seekers and refugees? And how can regions and cities successfully support the integration of refugees into local communities, societies, and labor markets? So for some answers to these questions, I would like to invite Laura to the stage for her pitch.
Thank you, Laurent. Thank you to Aspen to give us one more time the chance to present this very large study, which added value is mainly the regional and the territorial perspective, since the studies on migration and refugees has been a big proliferation of study in this area. But what I think our study achieves to do is showing, as Laurent was saying, that regions and local municipalities has been at the forefront of this challenge. What we have found out is that definitely the distribution of asylum seekers and refugees across Europe reflect the relation with the country of arrival, transit, and destinations. They mainly settle into capital regions, but also in border regions. This is the case, for example, of Greece or Turkey, or some area in between Italy and France. And also that refugees and asylum seekers tend to settle in areas that are economically dynamic regions. And this also has some movement. Of course, there are some secondary movement within and across country. And for example, our Romanian case studies, and I promise it's not an answer to the previous question, but I was reflecting about this morning. For example, Bucharest has traditionally a long stand tradition of migrant coming to the capital. But now, because, for example, a city like this one, Iasi, has become prominent development, asylum seekers and refugees are also find home here. This leads us to reflect upon the factors that pulling factor for asylum seekers and refugees to choose the place to settle. As I was saying, socioeconomic situation is very relevant. Refugees tend to go in industrial area that offers low-skilled jobs, but with a large employment market. Of course, family and social ties are really very relevant, including diaspora phenomenon. This is the case, for example, of France. and of course, presence of national redistribution policy. For example, Ireland is in Ireland is quite strong the influence of redistribution policy in the country. But it must be observed that dispersion and dispersal policy at European level and within countries is definitely a second factor compared to the socioeconomic situation of a destination place. Therefore, there is a case for more cooperation for some arrival areas that are lagging behind. Let's think about, for example, Sicily or some Greek island, to improve the cooperation, to foster the integration effort as well as the capacity building to include refugees. So to answer to the question, distribution goes through fostering capacity building of certain areas, certain regions in Europe. Of course, this leads to the next slide. That, of course, is about inclusion. And in this, we are facing different challenges. The first one is a legal challenge related to the granting of asylum and the refugees status. And action there needs to be target the limbo situation in which refugees very often find themselves. When this process of recognition of the status of refugees is too long, this creates a scaring effect. And to mitigate that in the medium-long term, we need to accompany them, for example, into language courses already at the reception center, or supporting those that are likely to become refugees into accommodation, for example. In terms of institutional challenge, integration is very important. Integration, multi-level governance. This is an issue that needs to be faced by an integrated approach, but also in areas that are somehow regions that are lagging behind. There is need of international organization taking part. For example, we have noticed that the International Organization for Migration in Bucharest, for example, has played a relevant role to enhance the institutional capacity of the city to face this challenge. And the same in the border with Serbia, between Serbia and Hungary. Last but not least, of course, for integration of refugees and migrants. Of course, we are talking again a wide set of policy area: education, housing, and labor market, access to labor market. There is need of trained and appropriate public administrated personnel that are able to deal with multiculturalism. What has been proven particularly effective is the involvement of local population in projects. For example, some examples are from Sweden, where long-term unemployed people, indigenous population, has been put together with refugees and asylum seekers in a project. And this really promotes multiculturalism and avoids the tension created by the aggregation and the congestion of refugees and asylum seekers in certain areas. Finally, of course, funding is also very important and make sure that projects are self-sustainable. And what else we have noticed is that political willingness is very relevant. Mayor role, sometimes in several situations, this is the case of Palermo, this is the case of some mayors in Greece, play a relevant role in mitigating social tension when the agglomeration of refugees is significant in a place. That's it. Thank you.
Many thanks, Laura. As cities across Europe are growing and people are moving from rural to urban areas, decent and affordable housing is increasingly hard to get access to. Since the 1990s, house prices have increased faster than incomes in most post-industrial regions. And this has led to an affordability gap that is now a critical issue for social cohesion and sustainability in metropolitan areas. It impacts on the well-being of citizens across Europe. So really allowing for citizens to find decent and affordable housing is a key challenge for local policymakers. So how do we solve our policy challenges? And in particular, how do we ensure that cities and regions can provide decent and affordable housing for all citizens? And crucially, where do we find data on this issue? So for some answers, please, Renaud, you have the floor for the pitch from the housing project.
Thank you. Good morning. To answer two questions. First, we investigated how cities in Europe can measure, monitor, and analyze spatial patterns of housing affordability. That is to say, the ratios between price of rent or price of property and several measures of income. And also, one question was how we can provide across European cities for policymakers some insights on this key priority of affordability. We particularly had in mind some initiatives such as the Partnership on Housing of the European Union agenda that pushes for an improved knowledge regarding affordable housing. And we did so on case studies in Poland, Spain, France, and Switzerland in this short project. One idea was to reverse the common approach we usually have on property markets when comparing cities. The approach is often limited to benchmarking and price comparisons between capital cities. It is one thing to benchmark the cost of a two-bedroom apartments in capital cities and major economic centers to accommodate the need of travelers and executives. This is the idea behind Mercer Cost of Living Index, for instance. It is another problem to assess what it takes in terms of resources for residents, in terms of income, in terms of time of work to buy or let an apartment or a house. And this is what we tried to do in this project. So if I had to pitch our main result, I would say that first, housing costs exacerbate differences, inequalities, and segregation. The affordability gap is detrimental, especially to the wider middle class that have to move to the remaining affordable places of functional areas. Affordability is not simply structured according to the classical center-periphery geography. This is more a mosaic that is contingent to local submarkets, local policies, local built environment, local income structure. But moving to suburban and peripheral areas of functional areas, this affordability gap fuels profitability and housing wealth accumulation also. That is the reason why in the report we provide analytics on profitability of the rental market alongside with analytics of affordability. Because it has to be put together. So we use data from various and heterogeneous sources to do so. Like DAO, I'm not sure that big data is appropriate because it's misleading in many ways. We did not have to deal with massive data the way computer scientists consider it in terms of computation. Our problem was unstructured, harvested and messy, unconventional data, which is only one side of the issue. So there is a gap, a data gap, a lack of harmonized data to map and monitor affordability. To cope with this, the report brings insights on how institutional data, such as transactions, can help and bridge them to other kind of unconventional data to provide a cost-effective and harmonized data collection effort. Unconventional data, if I may stress that, might originate from institutions, and there are plenty. Taxes, real estate agents, websites, transactions, local tax rolls, parcel data. But one thing is that they are not originally designed for socioeconomic and demographic research. And this is the key issue of the problem. We incorporate this kind of data in research, whereas such datasets have not been designed and documented to do so. So to bridge the gap between institutional data, transaction data, harvested data on the internet, we harvested web-based marketplaces and real estate advertisement. We compared the data because we considered they were interesting proxies to build analytics on the markets. And basically, we analyzed local markets, so we had to deal with local data. They were structured in many ways. Some came as latitude and longitude. Some came as zip code geographies. Some came as parcel level geographies. Some came as municipal or LAU2 geography, and we had to bridge them to make them comparable together and deliver them in geographies that are useful for policymakers. So if I could just highlight a few advices that we may have for policymakers at the end of this project. First, data harvesting is costly in terms of human resources especially. And scrapping is an interesting method. It has to be understood. It's a very costly method. So gathering data for real estate market in European cities is possible, but it requires resources. But one issue will be to closely monitor the relationships between rental markets and ownership markets. For instance, in Geneva, Warsaw, Krakow, Madrid, and Barcelona, they are by far the least affordable functional areas for ownership. And Paris and Geneva are not affordable in terms of ownership, but this is mitigated by the rental structure in Geneva and in Paris and in Avignon because of local regulation. And one idea would be to closely monitor the relationships between rental and ownership. A last issue would probably be to develop targeted analysis on how to maintain the right to the city for the middle class. And this is a slippery issue. It's often addressed by pushing for more provision of housing under the assumption that offer and demand will regulate things and more provision will help control the prices. This is not true in many cases. And what occurs is that new provision of housing is brought to places where prices and affordability is low. That means that you have to produce costly houses in places where housing is costly. That's it.
Many thanks. So we've heard already quite a lot this morning about data challenge, and the next pitch will also focus on this particular aspect. So territorial policy development and also the planning for functional areas related to our topic from yesterday really requires a knowledge base and indicators that capture this functionality and the interactions beyond administrative boundaries between very diverse urban and rural regions. So new data sources such as big data, as we've just heard, so they offer some potential for analyzing the dynamics and interactions within functional areas and also particularly within growth corridors. So big data can be used sometimes in combination with traditional statistical data to examine flows between different areas. And it's really key for local policymakers in particular also to understand how big data can be used for designing and implementing better spatial planning and territorial development policies, and also crucially how to improve the cooperation between public authorities and private providers and big data platforms. And this brings us to our next set of challenges. So the utilization of spatial data that accurately captures these functionalities has been rather weak, and particularly in cross-border areas. And also, the potential for using this big data really requires new collaborative business models between public and private actors. So these are the main challenges, and for our next pitch we'll hear from Helke from the Big Data on and Integrated Territorial Policy Development in European Growth Corridors project for her pitch.
Thank you. So indeed, we started from that situation that in many times the utilization of this kind of new data that describes flows and interactions in growth corridors is rather weak in the planning processes, and also the evidence base mostly relies on data that is bound to the administrative territories, thus not describing that much what is actually going on between the regions and countries in transnational growth corridors. So we were talking about yesterday about functionality, functional areas, and how, indeed, what are functional areas. And in fact, in this project, we were aiming at broadening the perspective of functional growth corridors in a way that we were attempting to look at different data sources, not just data sources describing physical mobility that is the usual way to provide evidence for growth corridors. That is, of course, quite a natural perspective, because growth corridors, in fact, they mostly rely on and built on the physical flows and the connecting infrastructure. But so we had one case study where we did a social network analysis that then gives you a little bit different perspective of the interactions that are happening along the growth corridors. And we took a look at the European Regional Development Fund partnership data that was in the KeepEU portal. And we analyzed the interactions between project partners. And the results shortly revealed that there was, in fact, in our study area, quite active collaboration going on in the eastern part of the area. So a lot of projects between Finland and Estonia, for example, and also with Latvia. But then if it look at it from the perspective of Northern Growth Zone, that is supposed to be a collaborative area between from Oslo via Stockholm to Turku and Helsinki and all the way to St. Petersburg, then from this perspective, it indeed looks like there isn't that much active collaboration going on. But we have to remember that this is only this one data set, and we didn't take into account the different kind of funding sources, for example. So this was a short study on this issue. But definitely we feel that this kind of results could be used, and also this kind of data sources could be studied further to think about how we could utilize this kind of knowledge to support policy making in corridor policies and elsewhere as well. Then we had the next slide, we had mobile positioning data. This was a case study done by the Estonian team. So clearly an interesting data set to explore and for different scales of territorial policy making. And so the aim of the case study was to develop a methodology for everyday mobility database. And this was done in collaboration with the Ministry of Transportation. And so the result was a database supporting mobility-related policy making based on almost real-time understanding of mobility that then clearly provides a more comprehensive view on the daily mobility. And this was then the attempt in the case was also the aim to try to combine this kind of new unconventional data with the statistical data that has been traditionally used in transportation planning. So clearly potential there also for cross-border perspectives, because indeed in the Baltic Sea area there is an active company providing data from all these countries that we had in the targeted analysis. So there seems to be active collaboration going on already between public and private sector to utilize this new data source. So interesting to see in the future what comes out of this collaboration. Finally, clearly there is a need to develop both legislation and ecosystems to work with this data, because in fact Tartu team has been doing research for 12 years where they have been looking at the utilization potentials of this data. So there are no no quick answers to this kind of new situations, and the analyzing of this data requires often quite long value chains and expertise from different fields. So this is also one message that we want to tell based on this project. Thank you.
Many thanks. We will continue on the theme of connectivity. Urban-rural connections are of vital importance for the future development of non-metropolitan regions. They are not only remote areas that face demographic or economic challenges. They are also functional regions with their own dynamics, challenges, and assets. Mobility and accessibility are key factors for the territorial development of non-metropolitan regions, and tailored mobility policies can benefit those regions in particular. Improved rural-urban linkages and new solutions for sustainable mobility can provide inhabitants in these regions better accessibility to labor markets and to services of general interest. But what are the challenges facing these metropolitan regions when improving connections and accessibilities? They cannot provide the same level of accessibility to usual public and private transport, typically for economic reasons, and also negotiating economic capacities together with institutional frameworks can hamper the implementation of innovative and place-based solutions. So I'd like to invite Jason to pitch some thoughts to those two challenges from the URUC targeted analysis. Please.
So the project we were involved with was the urban-rural connectivity in non-metropolitan regions. And in this project, we basically looked at 4 case study areas that we had defined as being non-metropolitan regions and developed a policy to help understand the strategic challenge for these regions, and also a delivery planning tool, to help policymakers to better prioritize the spending of funding and spending of time for planning for these particular regions. And we feel that these tools can also be used by other non-metropolitan regions across the EU for their own strategic and planning needs. And as part of the project, we identified a series of challenges and recommendations that are relevant for EU policymakers, but also regional and national planners across the various member states. And we wanted to reflect on these challenges and make clear some of the solutions that are required to better optimize and integrate these regions into transport and accessibility planning in terms of policy making. And I think the appropriate starting place is to talk about non-metropolitan regions themselves, which are not particularly well defined or very well explained within the literature. Essentially, you look at population-based estimates, and you then realize that non-metropolitan regions are defined as anything that isn't metropolitan or over 250,000 persons in terms of an area. The problem being that these non-metropolitan regions are then presumed to be attached to these metropolitan centres, and anything that is good in terms of policy making for metropolitan centre should have a trickle-down or knock-on effect in these non-metropolitan regions. And what you quickly realise is that when you look at the functionality of these regions, the territories themselves are not connected in a number of instances to these metropolitan centres, but in fact have smaller urban centres where commuting flows and transport and services and economic opportunities are located. And you have smaller population centres in these territories to which populations across rural areas are then connected. And the problem then for these non-metropolitan regions is they tend to fall between 2 stools. They tend to be in between places, where funding in particular is prioritised for metropolitan regions alongside these territories. And when funding cuts arise or austerity measures are taken, they are first to be cut. So they're last to be prioritised and first to be cut. And our project in particular stressed the need to better understand what a functional region is, what the linkages are that create a functional region or create a functional non-metropolitan region in this particular instance. And what we quickly realize is that the needs of these particular regions are distinct from the needs of other territories. So when you look at, for example, connectivity and transport solutions, the solutions being proffered by policymakers tended to be market-led solutions. And the problem for, in this sense is that market-led solutions tend to not work particularly well in these territories, simply because they are a social construct and promote social cohesion rather than creating opportunity and economic development. The other issue is in terms of economic churn and demographic drain. So the problem in creating functional metropolitan regions that then attract talent from these non-metropolitan areas is that economic leaders within these areas are then starved of appropriately skilled workers. And there's this enormous drain. And so the focus is always to create new economic opportunity from a policymaker's perspective. But the leaders and local stakeholders in these areas are more concerned with maintaining existing economic leaders and ensuring that they get an appropriate pool of skilled labor. And so the other issue, major issue from an economic perspective, in quite a number of these regions was the seasonal fluctuations. The feeling was that when you looked at the tourism sector as a particular area of focus, that metropolitan regions had an almost nostalgic view of these non-metropolitan territories and liked to visit them at particular times of the year and suddenly see an enormous glut of activity across the transport system, but didn't appropriately plan a transport system to cater for that. So you saw this enormous congestion occurring 2 to 3 months of the year, and then an enormous fall off in both employment but also traffic and transport. So it was, again, what's required are more tailored solutions that are created in consultation with stakeholders themselves to better organize and to better plan a transport system for the needs of the non-metropolitan region itself, rather than presuming it as being attached to a larger economic unit. There we go. The other issue that we were asked to emphasize in the project and to bring back to policymaking at an EU, but also national and regional level, was institutional frameworks and institutional representation. The classic example, given very early on in the project by the lead stakeholder from Scarborough, was a regional plan for transport that was created at a regional level, but the realization was that they'd forgotten to give an appropriate amount of funding to the lead stakeholder and to Scarborough, so they put a purple box over the territory on the map and covered it with the name of the plan so everybody could realize, forget that they had forgot to appropriately fund this territory. And they are very keen to have a place at the table in terms of policy making. And one of the suggestions that we brought back then was I have 30 seconds. Wow. Thank you, Lauren. It's not coming back, I presume. I'll just put it on here. So the other issue then was around institutional frameworks and getting a place at the table for appropriate representation of these local stakeholders in transport planning and in policy making. Now, again, and I can finish on this point, one of the key issues for these territories was that funding availability from regional, national, and even supranational funders was ad hoc. They had the skills, but not the capacity to deliver on these projects and on these funding call opportunities. And what they, again, stressed was the need to improve accessibility to funding opportunities, but by essentially ring-fencing them for non-metropolitan regions. But also, again, making the bureaucratic burden in terms of applying for, being made aware of, and taking advantage of such funding opportunities to simplify it and ensure that territories and municipalities with low levels of capacity but high levels of skills could appropriately respond to these funding calls. Thank you very much.
Slido, please. I would like just to ask those of you in the audience, we've had an enormous number of questions for this round in Slido. So to help me out, please have a look at those questions and rank them appropriately. So have some votes to rank up the questions you particularly want answering, because I can't get the panelists here to answer all of these possibly, so I need your help in that regard. There are many questions with regard to youth unemployment, however. So Andrea, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind. The highest ranked question so far is, how do you predict that the gig economy, Uber, Deliveroo, etc., will affect the job market for young people? If you could start with that one, and also maybe have a go with how better manage the mismatch of the qualifications and the attitudes of youth and labour market needs. So if you have a go at those two questions, I would be grateful.
Of course, here we go. Uber and Deliveroo, these are an example of the platform economy. And everyone is a bit concerned about platform economy. A study came out 2018 predicting a huge influx on it. It was retracted in January of this year, but before it was retracted, it caused quite a stir as people were worried that platform economy was going to pretty much push established employers out of business and take over young people economy, because it seems more accessible to them in the terms of it's difficult to find a full-time job, so let's enter the platform economy. This is true, and it's not that we are recommending young people avoid the platform economy, it's that we are recommending platform economy has to be regulated. Deliveroo and Uber, they provide employment, but they do not provide social security, they don't provide vacation, maternity, or anything that the European Commission would define as a quality job. So a young person, of course, can choose to enter this form of employment, but they are pretty much self-employed. There have been examples in Spain where a person working for a food delivery service was basically full-time employed by them and has sued them for status of full-time employee, which is only fair by European regulations. So in the future, we have to look at young people's rights and protections on the labor market in regards to these services, while of course utilizing them to the fullest because they are quite accessible and make modern life convenient. Then again, the mismatch of qualifications. Here I come back and I stress again, continuous lifelong learning and education methods. If your young persons are not educated for the immediate needs of your regional labor market, you have to sit down at the table with employers and with the service recipients, the persons who need a specific service, sit down, identify the required skills, and then create quick traineeships, create apprenticeships, create on-the-job learning and very quick lifelong learning courses. You can have a qualified workforce within a year with such a training and then occupy the positions. I believe that the idea that young people's attitude is not matching the current labor market might be a bit misled, to be quite honest. I believe that people are quite ready to think that young people don't want to work. It's not true. Young people are not ready to work for 40 to 50 years in the same job, and this is not a bad thing because this will likely not be their career path.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. I'm now going to come to Renaud for two questions about the housing project. The ones second and third on the screen there, now first and second on the screen. We know there's an affordability gap, but what do we do about this? How can your conclusions be used by policymakers to actually change something? And have you looked into the impact of sharing economies and touristisation on housing prices? If you could quickly have a go at those two questions, I'd be grateful.
And actually, the two questions go together. For policymakers, housing is typically a multi-scalar issue, and it has to be resolved at several scales and levels of governance together. First level of governance is monetary policy. To go straight to the point, easy access to credit, and an incentive towards debt, and more households' debt fuels housing prices. It's one issue. Another problem is state policies and state policies incentives towards property owners market. Basically, housing and property owners markets have been subsidized throughout the 25 countries of the OECD. And one problem that fuels property prices up and that impacts affordability are state incentives towards ownership. A last issue is a local problem. it's a local problem, and it's how rental market, affordable rental market, affordable owner market, touristic markets are distributed across space, and what you can do about that locally in municipal government. For touristification and, well, Airbnb, we looked at the data, and we compared in Barcelona, in Madrid, in Paris, the impact of Airbnb in terms of how it pressurizes markets locally. Well, it's very local. It's only in the very center of the city. It's very localized in Barcelona, very localized in Paris. It does not clearly impact the issue of affordability in the rest of the functional urban area. So it really has to be connected to how you distribute social housing, rental housing throughout the area, and how you balance things locally. It's not probably an issue to ban rental housing for tourism, for instance. So I tried to answer two questions at the same time.
Excellent, thank you very much indeed. So keeping it concise as well, most welcome. So there's a question to Laura from Tommaso Lecca for the Migrare project. How should cities and regions deal with failed asylum seekers when returning to the country of origin is not possible, for example, because such country doesn't cooperate? What should cities and regions do? You can see that one highlighted now at the top on the screen. That's off, I think.
Now?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. I was saying that this is quite of a relevant question, and the scope of the study didn't look into irregular migrant, but I think there is a lot of space for further research in these. And the project clearly highlights that this is an issue that can somehow bring some clashes between a level of governance, because while several aspects related to the legal challenges are dealt at national level, then the practicalities of facing this challenge are at regional, local level. Therefore, I think the very first point is that there is at times a legal and legislative vacuum in certain situations that are created also by some changing attitudes. For example, the case, without getting political, but in the case of Italy, the most recent reform with the security degree with the current government is creating, as I was saying, a vacuum, a legal vacuum. What local level can do in this context is definitely activating non-governmental organizations that are mobilizing themselves to somehow shelter those that are left in this gray zone. But definitely there is need for local institutions, local actors to lobbying, be more at national level to somehow fill this legal vacuum.
Okay, excellent. I've got two quick questions for the other panelists. So to Jason, I'm not sure we've got that on the screen, but for the question is, have you investigated the effectiveness of public service obligations in transport provision? No. Mute button at the top. Yeah.
Is this one working?
Oh,
there we go. So I've been watching all these sort of questions popping up in Slido, and there's some really good ones about Eric, I must say. So if anyone wants to pop up to me at the end and have a chat, I'm more than happy to do so. In this particular instance, the issue of public transport was a major component of what we were working on the project. It's somewhat complex. In the first instance, these areas are typically very dispersed in terms of population, and in fact the best solution in quite a lot of instances is private car. So persuading individuals to switch to public transport is even more challenging. The other problem, of course, is that public transport was frequently poorly organized, I think it's fair to say, where you might only have one service in the day, and persuading people to engage with that, you know, if you miss this bus, then you're going to be here overnight, was extremely difficult. The other point is that historically they've seen fluctuations in terms of the provision itself, the quality of it, the quantity of it, and so forth. And once bitten, twice shy seemed to be the attitude in terms of public transport. What we really focused on was mixing modes and mixing passenger services. So we were suggesting the expansion of voluntary community services with the support of local municipal authorities that are tailored to the needs of small communities in particularly remote areas. We also focused on improving access to, say, for example, if a school bus was passing through a district, why shouldn't it also take on board elderly passengers, or why shouldn't it take on board somebody who wants to commute to the same place in terms of work? So public transport is notoriously difficult in terms of improving the culture surrounding it, but what we wanted to try and do was both raise the profile of that, stress to policymakers the needs to stabilise and ensure a consistent supply over time, but also look for alternatives that could intersect with that and improve the offering in terms of transport to get people from cars into other alternative means of transport.
Right, excellent. And then a final question, quickly, if you can, to Helke. Big data mobility, you're mapping where people are going, but how do you use this to predict where people will go? Or are you just using current flows to help work out where bottlenecks are?
Thank you. As I'm the least technical person of our research team, I will provide you a short answer, and you can have a look at our report that's coming up soon. But basically, yes, these kinds of new data sets like mobile positioning data or automatic traffic measurement data that we also had a look at in the project can be used as a basis for building these kind of predictive models, but that's a topic for further research, definitely not possible in this kind of short project, and also detecting bottlenecks and thinking about how can like different interventions, how do they affect mobility patterns and so on. So,
okay,
yes.
Excellent. Okay, good. Thank you very much indeed. So thank you. Give a warm round of applause to these panelists. Thank you, all of you. Now we move to the third round, so back to Laurent.
Many thanks to all our speakers, and thank you also to the audience for the many questions. Unfortunately, time is a little bit limited, but there is a coffee break coming up. Do bear with us for another 30 minutes or so. But then you can put your questions also directly to our speakers. So our third and final round of pitches will focus on governance, planning, and financial tools. And I would like to invite our three final pitch partners to come up on stage. We have Eric Glersen from Spatial Foresight for territories with geographical specificities, the Aspen Bridges project. We have Sukhid from the University of Liverpool for maritime spatial planning and land-sea interactions. And we have Fiona Wishlade from the European Policies Research Center for financial instruments and territorial cohesion. So cooperations between different actors, institutions, functional activities, and spatial organizations can be challenging as they all have different, fragmented, and competing interests. So regions and cities need to work with neighboring territories to explore common strengths and also to promote more functional links and interactions between places. In doing so, they should consider the geographic specificities of territories, so mountains, islands, sparsely populated areas, and coasts. They differ in their historical heritage, in their cultural norm and social practices. And when we think of the interactions between land and sea, we have to consider that any development that takes place in the marine environment also has an impact on shore. And likewise, our terrestrial activities have an impact on the oceans. Then, when we think of financial tools, we have to consider that many of the obstacles to the development in more disadvantaged regions also make the implementation of financial instruments more challenging. So starting with territories with geographic specificities, so mountains, islands, sparsely populated areas, and coastal areas, they face different factors of constraint that make them different from other territories. They include insularity, remoteness, lack of critical mass, and vulnerability. And these factors impact on all aspects of their economic, social, and ecological development. But the territories are very diverse. Some are struggling, but others are also very dynamic. Territorial and sectoral policies could be more efficient and effective if you take these geographic specificities into account. So what are the challenges facing policymakers? First of all, at European level, how could policies be more focused on improving governance in territories with geographic specificities? And then at regional and national level, how can programs better account for geographical specificities? So I'd like to invite Eric to come and share some insights from the Bridges project.
Thank you, Laurent. Good morning. Yes, as Laurent said, we're covering 4 specificities: mountains, islands, sparsely populated areas, and coast, which is just about half the European territory, or around there, on about all types of themes. So we're covering everything in half of Europe. I'm not going to summarize this in 5 minutes. I will talk about governance. We said, how can this change, and why maybe do we think of these as primarily as governance issues? We said that some of us are struggling, others are succeeding, performing very well, but the issue is very much about governance. And I will try to update you on the current dialogue we have with cohesion policy actors. Why our findings show that using these categories could help to build better place-sensitive investment policies in these concerned areas, but also the challenge of getting this message through when we are talking about these categories, because we are applying other lines of reasoning than those that usually prevail in cohesion policy discussions. We refer very much to territorial sense of belonging of territorial policy actors. So very much FUAs as they were presented yesterday by Simin Davoudi. What is the Commission? Obviously, the cohesion policy has been doing a lot in territories with geographic specificities, in terms of investments, in terms of bringing actors, performing the institutional setups. But this has not been a proactive policy of actually targeting these areas. The current position of the European Commission for the next programming period is quite the same. They have set up this notion of territorial strategies, which you can implement in relation within the context of cohesion policy programs, which is opening the door to all types of initiatives on these territories, for these territories. But there is no specific incentive, and in the past period we had more or less the same possibilities, and it didn't materialize to any large extent, because programs have quite enough to do with their business, their core business, and they will not add a layer of complexity unless they see a clear purpose. And this purpose is difficult to read in the types of indicators and measures that usually inform cohesion policy. TGS are interesting perspective precisely because they are not obvious functional areas. There is no labor market areas that fit. You can say, of course, that an island or mountain valley are often functionally integrated. That may be, but the mountain range is not a valley, and many islands are functionally integrated with their mainland. So to address to the specific challenges and opportunities of territories with geographic specificities, we have to acknowledge that they are essentially social and cultural constructs. So they are concepts built to make sense of the world around us. And acknowledging them as such helps us to understand that even if they are not functional territories, TGS share many issues. For example, how do you organize a public service obligation for an island? It is a very concrete issue. It is very difficult to put it into figures because the challenge is not about travel times. It's quite complex often. How does the boat connect with the bus when you arrive at the mainland? How exactly is it organized in terms of timing? Do you get the transport in terms of seasonality that island actors need? All of these are very specific issues which you will not find in the general accessibility measures you see generally used in European statistics. Same thing then for designing smart service of general interest in sparsely populated areas. We have a lot of very concrete issues there of how to make service provision function when you have very few people. There again, very difficult to get pan-European data on this. So to actually get this knowledge through how this could be useful, we are really talking about how organizing exchanges of experience, dissemination of good practices could actually change the situation for these areas. So we're talking about bringing actors together. We're talking about federating at the European level these actors so that they can talk to, for example, the transport sector for public service obligation at the right level. You can federate all of these concerns of islands at the European level and actually get a meaningful dialogue with sector authorities. Concretely, for cohesion policy, at the different stages of cohesion policy, how could this make a difference? Well, I will talk about 4 stages of cohesion policy implementation. First, many programs right now are are setting up socioeconomic analysis, preparing for the next programming period. When doing this, they can assess to a much more systematic degree whether specific vulnerabilities are taken into account. Islands refer to this as island proofing. Can you island-proof tourism development? You develop new tourism, but do you take into account the water resources or the pressures on local populations? What market failures occur? So you have specific market failures, for example, and once again on the provision of transport. They occur recurrently in many of these areas. Markets do not function in the same way. What occur? Well, how do you need maybe to think of territorial interventions in a different way? Because the causal effects are different. How can you draw on the European level? You have lots of European forums that exist, Euromontana, the CPMR Islands Commission, all of this develop a discourse. How can you actually use these forums to build a better cohesion policy? Also, how can you, in terms of organizing networks of regional policies, you have already a partnerships obviously for cohesion policy, but maybe you need to think of subgroups. Maybe within the regional partnership for cohesion policy, the groups of mountaineers, the groups of insular population can provide inputs and help you build a better policy that is closer to the people. And finally, when considering the links between the different programs, as I mentioned, you could organize a multi-level territorial governance by actually bringing together island interests, mountain interests at the European level, organizing the dialogue, having some side of secretariats that bring this reflections forward and acknowledge that this is primarily a governance issue. You need to build up the capacity of these actors to think their own situation, to challenge prevailing discourses, and to build corresponding policies. So governance issue is the key. Building capacity is the key, and the European level can make a difference in these respects. Thank you.
Many thanks. And remember, keep the questions coming on Slido. We have another Q&A session coming up. So moving on from the territories to the seas, Europe's seas have become important in policy making on at both European and national levels. The exploitation of seas and coastal areas for economic purposes becoming increasingly important, but there are also growing concerns linked to environmental issues. So to ensure that maritime activities can deliver growth and avoid sea use conflicts, the integrated planning of human activities both on land and at sea is needed. Maritime spatial planning is an increasingly important field of policy, aiming at reconciling these different demands on the maritime space. It's a cross-cutting policy tool, enabling public authorities and stakeholders to apply a coordinated, integrated, and transboundary approach to marine development. And it should really be achieved through a consistency of policies, plans, and decisions. And this brings me to our challenges. So what are the main impacts of maritime activities and maritime spatial planning on land? And how can terrestrial spatial planning consider them? So for our next speakers, Sue Kidd from the University of Liverpool, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laurent. Okay, so what are the main impacts of maritime activities on land? It's a complex question, and we have focused our attention in the MSP LSI project on using World Trade Organization value chain approaches to begin to understand the operation of key maritime sectors, and then to piece together information based on the different segments in the value chains about the spatial footprint of those sectors and the spatial implications of those sectors that territorial planning might need to consider. So in trying to sort of illustrate for you what that might be or what the picture might reveal, I've highlighted here, you probably can't see the detail, just one example that we have explored in our case studies that we've been undertaken in the project, which relates to offshore wind energy development in the Dutch North Sea. And what this has done is enabled us to follow the value chain of offshore wind energy from its initial development phase through manufacture and assembly of the different components that go into wind farms, the transportation issues that they present, leading up to the installation and commissioning of the wind farms, then the activities associated with the operation and maintenance of those wind farms, and ultimately decommissioning. Now, to date, there's only one wind farm, offshore wind farm, that's been decommissioned, but in the future, that is likely to be something that is increasingly significant. And what we have done is piece together information on the different actors in those different segments of the value chain to come up with a spatial picture of that particular value chain. And what that reveals is that this is an activity that is obviously has a major spatial footprint in the sea, but it supports employment not just on the coast, and that's very significant. If you actually look at the players involved in that value chain, they are spread right across Europe. They are, in the Dutch case, there are a lot of oil and gas companies that are moving into this area. Denmark is a major supplier. So there is a wide employment impact and implication. There is a requirement for seaward and landward infrastructure, and that isn't, again, not necessarily on the coast. Actually, quite surprisingly, because of various technical issues, sometimes the connections to the grid need to be inland. But I think more strategically, it's important to recognise that the development in the sea is a major component in this restructuring of our energy supply towards more low carbon sources, and that the North Sea as a whole could lead to supplying more than 12% of the EU's electricity supply by 2030, and significantly more as we look to the future. So marine planning is a key component in the framework conditions that are guiding the sector development, but actually spatial planning on the land also has a role to play. So that's just one example of what we've been looking at. And what that begins to reveal is the sheer complexity of this subject. And it's not just related to socioeconomic interactions. There's biogeochemical interactions, and governance factors are all part of this complicated mix. But what we have focused on in the project is to devise a method that enables people to step into the complexity. And a critical component of that is a scoping phase, which allows people to focus in a purposeful way on those land-sea interactions that are perhaps most critical at any point in time. And then, having undertaken that scoping phase, we've given guidance on how you might analyse governance structures that relate to particular land-sea interactions, as well as the value chain analysis that I've just described. And drawing those strands of thinking together, people can then come up with recommendations for good management of LSI. And I think the key point I want to make is that isn't just a marine spatial planning, maritime spatial planning issue, it's a territorial planning issue, and we should increasingly be thinking in all our endeavours of the land and the sea as one space, and territorial planning covering both. Thank you.
Many thanks. And this brings us to our last pitch. It's the last, but it's not the least. Perhaps it's the most important pitch. We've heard a lot different proposals for action, but there is the minor issue of how we're going to pay for all of this. So there's been a significant and sustained increase in the use of repayable financial instruments in cohesion policy over the last 2 programming periods. Financial instruments comprise a very diverse set of financial products, loans, guarantees, and equity, and they're all implemented in different ways. So the main policy targets under the 2007-2013 programming period were enterprise, where financial instruments were used, were enterprise support, urban development projects, energy efficiency, and renewable energy projects. But what does this increasing shift to using financial instruments mean for territorial cohesion? And what evidence is there on the effectiveness of using financial instruments as a complement to grants in terms of added value for territorial development? And this brings me to our final set of challenges. So what are the main territory-related drivers and obstacles for using ESIF financial instruments, and how can regions and cities benefit from using financial instruments? Our last speaker, Fiona, please, looking forward to hear the final pitch.
Thank you very much, Laurent. Good morning, everybody. Well, as Laurent's explained, financial instruments have become an increasingly important tool of cohesion policy. But I think one thing to mention is that although they've gained an increasingly high profile, the amounts are still rather small. In the 7 to 13 period, it was around about 11 billion of structural fund monies over 7 years, and among 25 countries. Several member states didn't use them. That amounts to just about 3% of the structural funds. So it's a niche tool of implementation. In terms of how things play out and what are the main territory-related drivers and obstacles for using FIs, I think one of the notable things is that, in fact, there is no consistent territorial pattern. There's instead a kind of a mosaic of situations created by an interaction of a number of drivers, and those are essentially fourfold. The first relates to the domestic context. Those are issues like culture, the extent to which businesses and other project promoters are used to using grants rather than subsidies. Another is experience. Financial instruments are complicated to implement, and many managing authorities have struggled with the challenges of doing that. Related to that is the issue of administrative capacity and whether there's the in-house expertise in order to implement this kind of tool. The second group of drivers relates to the operational program objectives, and here it's important to recognize that financial instruments are not suitable for every kind of project, far from it, in fact. And so an important question is whether financial instruments fit with the objectives of the operational program. The third issue relates to the size of cohesion policy allocations. Now, in general terms, you can say that the issue of critical mass is quite an important issue for financial instruments. But in fact, managing authorities have rather different or diverse responses to the question of scale of cohesion policy and the use of financial instruments. In a number of cases, managing authorities simply decide that the amounts involved are too small to be worth the administrative hassle of using the monies for financial instruments. On the other hand, some managing authorities conclude that because the amounts that they have are small, this is a good opportunity to use financial instruments on a pilot basis and create a legacy that can be used in future. So they need to make the money work more. The last group of drivers relates to the presence of existing financial instruments and financial institutions. These are hugely important, but again, countries and managing authorities respond in different ways to their existence. In some cases, they use structural funds to complement existing instruments and essentially provide another credit line or another block of finance to complement something that's already happening. In other cases, they invent or pilot or create completely new structures and instruments that are freestanding and separate from what already exists. So there are quite different approaches to that, and also in the instruments that are actually used. One thing to mention that is quite rare in this context is to have financial instruments that actually target regional or territorial disadvantage. And the principal reason for that, I would argue, is that the regulatory constraints mean that there is pressure on drawing money down as rapidly as possible and not constraining the use of financial instruments. Moving on to the second set of questions, how can regions and cities benefit best from using ESIF financial instruments? The first question, as I mentioned, is first of all to decide whether financial instruments are suitable at all. They're only suitable for projects which generate cost savings or have the capacity to generate revenue and are in line with operational program objectives. And that means that in the majority of cases, grants are likely still to be the most suitable types of instruments to use. The second issue is or the second need is to conduct an ex-ante assessment to establish what the financial needs are. This is important because if you're designing a market-led instrument, there is no benefit to be gained from crowding out the private market. That would be completely counterproductive. The third issue is to tailor the financial products to the local context. So if there is an antipathy, for instance, towards the use of equity finance, or you have a relatively sparsely populated area, you're unlikely to have the business ecosystem and critical mass to make that work. Fourth, nurture trust and good relations with financial intermediaries. This is an issue of time and experience. Related to that is the issue of administrative capacity. That can affect the kind of instruments that can be used. The next two are related. Monitor progress with implementation and adapt what's done in response to changes in the market. And lastly, refine policy based on experience. There are elements of transferability between different contexts. You can be a magpie and pick lessons from different economic environments. But what we've seen is that the key is to learn within the region and within the program and to refine policy based on that experience. Thank you very much.
Right then, so for the final round of questions from Slido. So we have one there, the top question for Sue, if you could have a go at answering that one. How can we reconcile the notion of energy supply from offshore farms with other LSI interests such as fisheries, shipping, tourism, and safety/defense? So you need to have the light off. Yeah. No, that's still not working. Now.
That's better.
Yeah.
Yes, that's better. Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And that is why maritime spatial planning is developing as a key new area of planning activity. But I think what's come out to me as somebody who's both a terrestrial planner and that is increasingly involved in marine spatial planning is that the sort of analysis that we've undertaken with the value chains really begins to tease out the land-sea interaction issues. So this isn't just something that is about sorting out the marine environment. So the Dutch North Sea example that I gave you for wind energy, they did have to change major shipping lanes routes to enable the development of the wind farms because there are certain sort of ground conditions and operational conditions. They can't just go anywhere, certainly at the moment with the technology that's available. But of course, they do also raise a lot of concerns, and some of those concerns are not just sea-based. So fisheries concerns are perhaps more sea-based, so they need to be located in areas away from nursery grounds for, sort of young fish and that sort of thing. But this relationship with tourism is important, and that's where actually the value chain analysis reveals that it isn't the coastal communities particularly that are benefiting from the economic value. The local stickability is a term that we used, of the economic benefits of wind farms. Those benefits are spread right across many countries, certainly not concentrated on the coast. But in many regions, there is seen to be a conflict with tourism. This is particularly, we did a similar case study in the Pomeranian Bight around tourism and wind farms, and there is a lot of potential conflict identified there. Whether it's real, we don't know, but there's a lot of perception. But I think perhaps related to that is, you might be surprised to hear this, that in terms of hard-to-reach groups for marine spatial planning, maritime spatial planning, terrestrial planners are amongst the top hard-to-reach stakeholders. There is limited engagement so far in MSP activities, and there's a real disconnect between the two systems, not everywhere. I wouldn't like to characterise that as a sort of, but it's not an uncommon situation, even in places like the Netherlands. So, I think that's something food for thought for people in this room.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. A question then to Fiona, the most highly ranked one there. Which European regions are leaders in using financial instruments, and what are the reasons for that? The question highlighted there on the top should be on already still.
Thank you very much. Well, I suppose it depends what you mean by a leader. In terms of the country or the regions that use it the most, around about 25 to 30% of investment through financial instruments under the structural funds is in Italy. That's not necessarily to say that it's the best. I think that, one of the key difficulties that we had is that there is a widespread absence of any impact data on financial instruments. And in fact, for a large proportion of the amount invested, we were not even able to establish how many final recipients there were, let alone what economic impact the investment could have had. In terms of the reasons for the use of financial instruments, one of the reasons that I didn't mention was pressure from the European Commission, which is very keen that people should seek a more efficient use of the structural funds from 7 to 13 in particular, and in the post-crisis period when budgets were flat. So that was a key driver. It's a less important driver in the current period because now an ex-ante assessment is obligatory, and you have to determine what the finance gap is and what the needs are.
Right, I'm just finding a question off Slido, because it's not. Oh no, hang on, it's now come ranked up. So if you can take that one that's on the screen for you there, Eric, and then we'll draw this round to a close. You mentioned market failures in transport, but you've investigated government failures in have you investigated government failures in passenger transport provision, and are cohesion investments the only way to deal with market failures?
We focus primarily on public service obligations, and there's an interplay between government and the market. And we see a number of difficulties setting up these public service obligations, especially when there are very few market actors, so the government fails about this interaction. We find it generally very difficult to work. We found in some of our case studies it was impossible to access the contracts of public service obligations. So actually knowing what the companies commit to is not possible because this is being kept secret by the public authorities. So this is one of the challenges we we've dealt with. Obviously, cohesion investment isn't far from the main. This is once again, cohesion policy is about just giving the incentive to make a difference. It is not going to change transport in Europe. So we are talking about cohesion policy considering all kinds of public interventions in the field of transport and how they could help, for example, in capacity building, making it possible for actors to build better PSOs, to get some kind of level of comparison in these situations, which often, once again, you have this proximity between governments and market providers, which generate very unsatisfactory situations for the users and, in general, for the development of the regions.
Okay, right. So thank you very much indeed for that panel. Give them a warm round of applause. Thank you. That brings us then to the coffee break. So the coffee, as previously, is just out here on the landing. And then please be back in this room for the final session in half an hour, so at 12 o'clock sharp, please. So we now move to the final session of the conference. So I would like to first give the floor to Timo Esser of the ESPON Managing Authority, and he's going to be talking about ESPON moving forward and the activities and plans for 2019-2020. So Timo, if you come to the pedestal, the floor is yours.
So, thank you, and thanks for having the patience after this long session. Also to inform you a bit about our program. From the program side, I'm just...
Wait, there's a problem at the moment. There we go. Perfect.
Perfect,
right.
yes. So, yeah, how far we are with the implementation with the program, and also to share a bit what we are discussing for the future of the program. So, where do we stand with the implementation of the program? Here you can see a chart, if you're close enough. The way we also have to inform to the Commission about the achievements of the program. As you know, the program has to meet some targets, and in that regard, for example, how many applied research projects have been implemented, where we have the target of 22, and we have already implemented 17, so we are relatively advanced with the target. And as I saw today, I mean, we're talking here about the report of 2018. We could see that we were even more progressing in the meantime. So it looks, in general, we are in the framework what we have been proposing. We are advanced with the targeted analysis, which is the second chart. We are still running a bit short with focus papers, and this is not a surprise because these are based on the results of the research programs. In that regard, you can also see where the workload will lie now in the second, or in the third of the program implementation, to harvest and to concentrate on outreach. We have achieved a lot of publications that you can see in the last bit, but I think this is always, as we deal with research studies, this is always something where we tend to overperform, where actually from the policy side it's said, okay, we have to be maybe more focused and have to concentrate on this very policy briefs and this type of publications. We also had the evaluation, midterm evaluation, and in the last meeting I was already giving you some indications. This was then closed, and the main messages have been that we should do more efforts towards regional and local policymakers. It's clear that we can meet the European level. We have good contacts. We are present at the national level, but to translate results into the local and regional context should be an effort which should be particularly focused on now in the final part of the program. What was also found out was that it would be interesting to involve scientists more in stimulating debates, and I think the results which we have been hearing today actually make it attractive to organize debates with policymakers and scientists. There are a lot of important issues to transmit, and in order to achieve that, we were asked to follow a more strategic approach to reach the target groups and to specialize our outputs and outreach and to respond to the specific needs which are voiced at the policy field. And there are messages also for the next generation of the program. And I mean, having heard now that we should be able to focus better on the needs, we recognize that, we have to better understand the context in which these results can be used. The question is then, how can we support our target groups to acquire, to use the evidence? And this is a discussion which we then took also forward in the joint working group, which was set up by the monitoring committee in order to discuss the new program for the next programming period. And I will develop a bit more in that regard. I mean, when we think now forward, ESPON should develop a role inspiring policy making and stakeholders by using its networks and by being closer to the user. I mean, we have a lot of examples now in this programming period already achieved: the territorial impact assessment, functional areas within regions, which was the theme of the day today. Where we can really deliver interesting results. We can further develop complementarities on evidence production by ESPON and capacity building with other programs so that we liaise closer with the programs. But in future, it should be clear also that evidence production is our core business, and however, we should better link that to the policy action cycle. And what we mean by that, and this is a discussion which takes place within this joint working group, we were looking at a kind of knowledge to action cycle. And we are thinking about how is actually knowledge used within a policy process. So that it's always important to think about evaluating outcomes, to sustain the use of knowledge in the policy circle, to identify the problems. And then where ESPON can actually, this is very interactive, where ESPON then can support is to adopt the knowledge to the local context, to understand where are the barriers to use this knowledge, and to support processes to select, tailor, implement interventions. And this is where a kind of skills element comes in the whole process. So that we should not only think about developing the evidence, but also to support the skills of those who potentially use the knowledge which is produced by ESPON. And then putting that in a broader context, then we can think of how ESPON could further evolve as a kind of knowledge broker. So if we say, okay, our main target groups are policymakers, policy enablers, that's people who work in administrations, in ministries, in agencies, who prepare policy, and also, and this was also one of the results of the midterm evaluation, to better focus the scientific sector and the researchers in the whole process, and that ESPON would aim at supporting the interfaces between these different groups. So the activities in that perspective of a knowledge to action cycle would actually mean to respond to the evidence needs in the first place, but to support the skills which are needed, for the production and for the use of the evidence. And in this context, we would call like evidence and skills only together build the knowledge what policymakers then can apply. So in that regard, ESPON would focus on filling in and support the interface between these three groups. And I mean, based on this kind of guiding ideas, now this joint working group is thinking about activities. We are taking a lot note of what's happening within your research, within the targeted analysis, where there's strong interaction taking place between policymakers and researchers within the outreach activities. There's a lot to learn and to follow up what we can use for the future program. Also, there is to be a discussion to be led about what kind of, how can we readjust roles, for example, also for the ESPON contact points. So this is just a kind of flavor what I can give you on the discussions which are ongoing. It's not conclusive yet. We are trying really to address the issue from a very fundamental point of view in order then to be able to develop a strategy which is very focused, selective, and really defines clear activities and tasks which are then to be implemented in the next phase of the program. This is what I wanted to share with you. At that stage, we will launch opportunities also to discuss the new program once it's there in its draft version, and we keep you informed. Thank you very much.
Right, building on that, I'll pass the floor to Ilona. And also, if you wish to post questions to either of the two, please do so in Slido, and we'll have time for one or two questions once Ilona has finished her presentation.
Good morning. Happy to see you all on the second day of the seminar. I hope you enjoyed last night. Thanks a lot to the Romanian presidency for offering us a wonderful dinner yesterday. Today I would like to share with you briefly some insights on the progress of the implementation of the single operation. Well, what can I say? We are moving forward. We have achieved excellent progress. I hope you have this impression. You can share it with me after the 1.5 days of the different presentations and discussions. And indeed, at the moment, we have reached the stage that it's not possible anymore to tell you everything that we are doing, simply because we have so many different activities. It's a large number of different things we're doing, both on the side of the production of research and also ensuring the outreach of our results. But I think we managed in the framework of this seminar to inform you on the different activities that we are running, on the main results that we have achieved so far. Therefore, in my presentation today, I will be mainly focusing only on the upcoming activities. So, firstly, if we start with the new applied research activities, we are currently implementing a public procurement procedure on 2 applied research activities: interregional relations in Europe and cultural heritage as a source of societal well-being in European regions. And these 2 activities are being implemented through a competitive dialogue procedure that should also help us in designing good terms of reference and also contracting eventually the service provider to implement those. And then one additional new applied research activity that was agreed with the monitoring committee when we discussed our annual work plan for this year is the digital transition of government and public services. This is the applied research activity that will be launched by us as via public procurement, of course, procedure in the coming months. And with this, we will have reached our output target, so to say, of 22 applied research activities. So this is the last applied research activity that we will launch in the framework of the current program. After the cutoff date of January 2019, we have selected 4 new targeted analyses. Here you can see the titles of the selected targeted analysis and the lead stakeholders who have proposed these targeted analysis ideas, and now we are developing them, and I think even have launched some of them again via public procurement procedure. So one of them is about territorial development scenarios for the functional area of Central Europe. Another one is related to socio-spatial effects of economic restructuring in Milan-Bologna. There, the lead stakeholder is the metropolitan city of Milan. Then we'll have one new targeted analysis activity on maritime economic clusters and their governance strategy, where Liguria region is the lead stakeholder who proposed this activity. And then finally, the 4th one that was selected is about spatial planning practices with digital data, where we have the Danish Business Authority as the lead stakeholder. Our last cutoff date for the targeted analysis is next Friday. And we hope to receive more proposals for targeted analysis from our stakeholders working at national, regional, local level, or among the EU-funded programs. So don't miss it, because this will be the last cutoff date in the framework of the current program, and we should be able to select 4 last targeted analysis to be implemented in the framework of the current program. So don't miss this opportunity. If you have an idea, if you have a group of partners, please apply. There are no specific thematic priorities this time compared to the last time, when our specific thematic priority was related to EU-funded investment in territorial or integrated territorial investment practices. This time round, it's thematically open. And as you probably know, the approach for applying is quite simple. You fill in the template explaining to us what is the policy need, what is the evidence need, how you will use the results, and who are your stakeholders, and how you will ensure their commitment throughout the process of implementing this targeted analysis. We're also working on upgrading our set of tools, online tools, and there will be 3 more to be developed. One is the tool for mapping soft territorial cooperation areas. This is an activity that was proposed by our research team that was working on Acteria, and we have taken up their proposals, this proposal for further research from the team, and have agreed with the monitoring committee that we will develop such a tool that will further stimulate stakeholders to identify soft territorial cooperation areas, to map them, to think about possible governance and planning solutions. Then we're also thinking of developing a new analytical tool for spatial comparisons. At the moment it is called HyperAtlas. We need to see how we will redesign this tool. And then finally an online mapping tool that we have. At the moment we have the tool that is called Remap, and then we will also see how to redesign this tool, and also how we link our tools with the database, the updated database that we have at the moment. Our main publication, of this year will be the State of the EU Territory Report. We have started working on that. The particular focus of this report will be related to supporting our stakeholders in discussing, defining, designing their future programs, post-2020 programs, in relation to the priorities of the future cohesion policy. We already have reached the stage of the first draft that we are discussing with the stakeholders, and you will also be invited to provide your feedback. And this report will present, again, as always, some observations on the main territorial development trends in Europe, and also offer practical advice to national, regional, local authorities and stakeholders for designing and implementing the future post-2020 programs. And we are planning also to launch, basically to present and discuss this report during the next ESPON seminar in Finland. So this will be our main publication that will be presented during the seminar. We're also planning to have a number of policy briefs that have been agreed also with our monitoring committee to be developed in the coming months. And here you can see the range of different subjects that we are planning to cover. In general terms, I have to say that as we are moving away from the stage of production, and as we are completing our research activities and receiving results, outreach, of course, is becoming our key priority, priority number one, and we will increasingly be focusing on outreach in the coming months and also in the following years. So for us, it is very important and is becoming even more important to be able to communicate our key messages and results in the format of different publications, and also by organizing different events and channeling our content in different online and also physical formats. And in the coming months and years, of course, we will be increasingly developing our publications to be able to communicate our messages to the different target audiences. This is the plan for this year. The digital urbanism one is the subject that is proposed by the Finnish presidency. And this we will be developing a policy brief to support the debate during the Finnish presidency, the intergovernmental meetings, and also we will have a specific debate on this subject during the forthcoming seminar in Finland. For us, it's also very important to be able to tailor our content that we receive as a result of our activities to the different needs of the different stakeholders. And this is why we have started a new practice of developing the so-called country fiches. And those country fiches, they allow us, is an exercise that allows us to extract all the relevant evidence from our research activities, from the studies, from the results, and synthesize them in publications presenting the nationally, regionally, locally relevant observations, data, policy advice. Also to both raise the awareness of our work at national level and also to support the policy debates within member states on the various subjects that they are interested in. And we have already prepared our first country fiche for Norway, and also we have drafts for Belgium, Switzerland, and we will be continuing this exercise throughout this year and also in the coming years to also show the relevance of the ESPON's work at different scales, meaning national, regional, and local. We will be very actively present this year in the European Week of Regions and Cities. I think this is the first time when we will be involved in that many different workshops and activities during the week. So you will, if you are planning to attend the European Week of Regions and Cities, you will hear a lot from ESPON and about ESPON. We are covering many different events. We will be organizing many of them ourselves, and we will also be contributing to the events that were initiated by the stakeholders. Here you can see the list of the different activities where we will be involved. And this, again, gives us a very good opportunity to present our results to the stakeholders, to discuss them with the stakeholders, to also gather inputs for the ongoing activities. So this is one of the discussion frameworks that we usually use in order to be able to stay in touch with broad audiences. And we are also planning, of course, our next seminar in Helsinki already, desperately trying to find a venue. And this seminar will be focusing on two main subjects: digital innovation in urban areas, and the second one, as I mentioned, the state of the EU territory report that will be officially launched, presented and discussed during the forthcoming seminar. And then Hanna Maria will of course tell you a bit more about the presidency plans. And finally, we are also, of course, working in the field of outreach. We are working at a so-called transnational scale, trying to communicate, to channel our results at national, regional, and local level to the stakeholders working on different subjects. And here you can also see a short overview of the upcoming activities. They are the ones that are painted in green. So, and we will have, for example, we will have a training in Bratislava on the ESPON database portal. We will also have a training on the ESPON TIA tool, and these trainings have been perceived very positively by our stakeholders because they really give an opportunity for stakeholders to learn about our tools, to see how they can be used in policy making to ensure that the policies that are developed by the stakeholders, they are territorially sensitive. In the framework of the transnational outreach, we're also organizing e-learnings and then specific events on the various subjects that are proposed by our stakeholders depending on their policy needs. That's all in brief from my side, and I hope to stay in touch with you all, and also that you will find an opportunity to participate in our forthcoming events. Thank you.
Right. So far there are no questions which have been posed in Slido, so I'm going to move on straight away to our next two speakers. Am I wrong? There's the poll. There is one just now. It's you, Timo. Evidence needs depend on policies, perspectives, and ambitions. Research is needed to know and understand them at different levels. Where does this type of research fit into the model that you presented? Do you want to have a go at that? And I'll... Here.
Okay.
There you go.
Yes, I mean the idea, and I think this is where really the challenge is actually to anticipate what could be needed within 2 years. What are the subjects which are on the policy agenda? And this is something where we put a lot of effort in trying to talk to people who are dealing with policy directly, to have contact with ministers, to understand what they think, what's on the agenda, to observe what's going on in the global discussion in the different countries partly. And we actually spent quite a lot of time also to discuss that within the monitoring committee to understand what could be topics in order then to be there when it comes to the daylight, if you like. I mean, we are in fact faced with a situation that when then a topic is hot, then ESPON cannot start to think about what shall we do, or how can research be. Then it's more or less for the ESPON and the GTC to look and see what's on the shelves, what data are there, and what can be produced. So, but this is something which we always are working on, and which is a constant challenge, I would say. I don't know whether you want to add to that, Ilona.
Yes, indeed. For us, it's very important to understand the policy needs of our stakeholders, and we do that by communicating with our monitoring committee members, also with our contact points, to understand what are the policy needs, where are the evidence gaps, what are the questions that they have, and how to relate our activities Sorry. Otherwise it looks like a toast. To relate our activities to these specific needs, and this is why we are continuously updating our policy needs assessment that we have prepared a couple of years ago to screen continuously these needs and to make sure that on the production side and also on the outreach side, that the needs match with what we are doing in the framework of the program. And for us, it has become increasingly important also to understand not only the needs at the national level of the people working on the subject of regional development, territorial development, but also to understand the needs of sectoral policymakers, to understand the needs of regions, of cities. So if you also have this information, then you are very welcome to communicate it to us to make sure that we can serve you according to your needs and in the way that suits you best. So, service orientation.
Keep the microphone because another question has come in for you. Can you explain a little bit more the steps and deadlines of the competitive dialogue?
No. No. That is quite a complicated procedure. I don't know, maybe Laurent can help me out with this one. In principle, we have launched already the call, so to say. We have already pre-selected 5 potential service providers for each of those activities with and there will be 2 rounds of discussion with the pre-selected service providers, individual conversations to discuss with them the feasibility, so to say, of these studies. What is their approach? What is the method that they propose to apply, implementing these activities? And then on the basis of that, we will finalize or develop the terms of reference, and then we'll launch the public procurement procedure to contract the service providers. Basically, this public procurement procedure gives us an opportunity to make sure that we reach high quality terms of reference with the range of tasks, with the method that can be implemented. Because the 2 subjects that are in question, the interregional relations and the cultural heritage, they are, from the research perspective, they are quite complicated and complex. And there are many challenges, methodological challenges, data-related challenges, and therefore the competitive dialogue gives us an opportunity by engaging with the potential service providers, with the researchers, to understand how to approach those different subjects from the analytical, from the methodological perspective, also from the policy perspective, to make sure that the tasks that we will eventually identify that will have to be implemented, that they are implementable and that we arrive at the results that we expect to receive.
Right, okay, thank you very much. Time is moving on, so I think we ought to then move on to our next 2 speakers from the 2 forthcoming EU presidencies. So I'd like to give the floor, first of all, to Hanna-Maria Ujenkangas, who's from the Finnish presidency and is a member of Espon's monitoring committee. Do you have some slides? Yes, okay, so by all means, please then come to the lectern.
Thank you and good afternoon on my behalf as well. I see that we have altogether 7 minutes with Sandra, so I'll try to be pretty quick. I'll briefly introduce you to the theme, the Finnish presidency aims in the fields of territorial cohesion and urban policy. But I would like to start by mentioning that as sustainability is one of the key priorities of our presidency. Those of you who have been around long enough may recognize our logo, as we have recycled the visual elements from the previous presidency from 2006. Oops. I accidentally, I think. Okay.
Oh, we go.
Here we go.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, what comes to territorial cohesion, of course, we want to, on our behalf, contribute to the drafting of the territorial agenda of the EU, of course, in close cooperation with other trio countries. as has been mentioned, digitalization is one of our themes in urban policy, but we would also like to take digitalization into a bit wider context and see, view the possibilities for territories otherwise as well as in the urban areas. We all know that what are mainly the key elements of the renewal of the territorial agenda and what needs to be done towards a updated agenda post-2020. Of course, we have elements in the territorial agenda and goals and themes that are relevant still, but we need to consider what has to be added, amended. Also, we need to think of the narrative and communication of the agenda, and I would say almost most importantly, think of the implementation mechanism. Another important aspect is combining the territorial agenda and connecting it more strongly to other EU policies and most notably cohesion policy. We will build naturally on the work done by previous presidencies and discussions had in the Directors' General meetings. Romania has done a good job, good work, and of course we will further analyze the questionnaire that has been sent out by the Romanian presidency. What will happen is that we will prepare a discussion paper for the DG meeting on the themes that need to be amended and possible new themes to be added. Also, we'll try to outline the communication plan and the implementation mechanism in this policy brief. And after the discussions in the Directors' General meeting, we'll draft a questionnaire to interest groups to see how they find and comment on the themes and proposals. Then what comes to urban development, we would want to support successful implementation of the urban agenda. And then, of course, we have the special team of digital innovations in urban environments. And there, the key question is, the emphasis is not so much on technological innovations, but we want to have a broader perspective on how digitalization can increase quality of life in cities, and green development, while at the same time accelerating economic growth. And then this is what to show you, to let you know what sort of events there are during our presidency. We have the NTCCP meeting in September, as well as Urban Development Group meeting. And Directors' General meeting is taking place in October. We have actually a joint session on cohesion policy and territorial cohesion on the first day of the meeting, and then the urban matters the next day. As Ilona mentioned, we have the Espon Week, Espon Seminar in the end of last week of November. And indeed, I hope as well that we find a venue, as it's rather cold in Helsinki that time of year. But to comfort you, we have seminar dinner venue already, so at least we get some food. And just briefly, I'd like to also mention the side events that will be organized by cities of Helsinki and cities of Oulu. The first one in Helsinki is in October, and the second one is in Oulu in December. Thank you.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And then, without any further ado, we'll move on to the Croatian presidency with Sandra Momcilovic. You need to press the button so the light is off. No, still not good. This one's working.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to have the opportunity to announce the Croatian presidency of the Council of the European Union. The first half of 2020, I would be brief and present our key priorities and timetables. Regarding the territorial issue, we fully support renewal of the territorial agenda as well as the process of adopting the Leipzig Charter, since the territorial agenda preparation is a group effort of the trio presidency, Romania, Finland and Croatia. We are looking forward to finishing the document's preparatory work. During the process, Croatia's focus will primarily be on implementation mechanism for the territorial agenda. Regarding the urban issue, our team will be green cities with special insight in green infrastructure in the urban environment and the reuse of buildings and spaces in terms of the transition to a circular economy. On the EU level, we have newly adopted regulation on the European Regional Development Fund and Cohesion Fund. And the document has a paragraph, Greener Europe, that regulates that ERDF and Cohesion Fund shall support specific objective, a greener, low-carbon Europe by promoting clean and fair energy transition, green and blue investment, the circular economy, climate adaptation, and risk prevention and management. So on the national level, Croatia is currently in the process of preparing the national development strategy, which will define priorities, measures, and goals that Croatia wants to achieve by 2030. And within the development direction Green Croatia, we are preparing 2 national development programs, one dealing with urban green infrastructure and the other one on circular economy and buildings and spaces. Considering all this, we recognize the theme of green cities as an important for sustainable development of EU, and we hope we will have the opportunity to further discuss the subject during the Croatian presidency. Also, the ESPON EGTC will support our presidency by preparing the policy brief. As for the event calendar, ESPON seminar together with the MC and ECP meeting was planned to be held during the last week of May in 2020 in Zagreb. But because of the large number of meetings in our capital at the time, we are yet to agree on the location. And there is a possibility of having the ESPON seminar and ESPON week on the other relevant meetings in other Croatian cities. Also, the NTCCP and UDG meetings are planned for 25th to 26th of February, and DG meetings are planned for 28th and 29th of April in Zagreb. So, hope to see you all in Croatia, and thank you for your attention.
Okay. Thank you very much. Just checking, I don't think there are any questions posed to either presidency, as far as I can tell, so you escape a Q&A round. So thank you very much indeed to both of you. What I would now like you to do is we'd just like to revisit the question in the Slido poll that we used up at the beginning of yesterday. We'd just like you to re-answer the same question to see if you've changed your answers in light of the last day and a half. So if you could all just go to Slido and then click on the polls option, you have the option I feel informed and inspired by, informed by, inspired by, or curious about ESPON evidence to support place-based policymaking in my country, the day 2 answer. And if you could just fill in the answer to that poll, I would be very grateful. So I'll just give you 30 seconds or so to do that. Before we then come to the final word from Ilona and from Radu. So I see 23 people have voted so far, 26. The numbers are flying up. I think we're slightly fewer people in the room today than we were yesterday, so we'll stop it when we reach something like 80 votes on there. I'll submit a vote here myself as well too. Seems to be going up very slowly now. Get those votes in, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe hitting 80 was too optimistic, so. Yeah. Right, I think we probably ought to stop there. 68 votes we've got. Can we stop it? Let's see what 69 votes. Let's see what result we got. We now have a higher percentage, at least, for informed and inspired by than we had yesterday. So I think that should be judged as progress. So I think you can be happy with that, Ilona and Laurent. So thank you very much indeed for your participation, not only with that poll, but on Slido over the course of the last day and a half. So that therefore brings me then to the very final things for closing of the event. First of all, I'd just like to give the floor briefly to Radu Nexuliu, I hope I've said that correctly, a monitoring committee member of ESPON from Romania. So Radu, your closing words, the floor is yours.
So thank you. I have many things to say, so I will start to be as brief as possible. So I will start with a roundup of the activities during the presidency in the fields of territorial cohesion and urban development. We had, well, part of it was already kind of presented by our Finnish and Croatian colleagues, so maybe I will not insist on that, but just to point out a couple of things. One of our aims was to use the results of ESPON projects during our presidency. And I would like once again to praise our ESPON family for the results and for their involvement in our activities, in particular the ESPON EGTC and the ETRF project team for their excellent inputs during our debates. And then, well, we had a total of 9 events culminating with an informal ministerial meeting in Bucharest on the 13th and the 14th of June. And it was finalized by a declaration of Bucharest, and we think that we managed to, first of all, bring a political commitment to these issues, to the urban agenda, continuation of urban agenda, and the links between urban development and the territorial cohesion issues. So we are quite satisfied with the fact that we kind of attained our initial objectives for that. I would maybe go directly to my impressions after the seminar. Me and my colleagues were really impressed with what we've seen. Maybe we are biased, but I will still have to say that we found the presentations rich in information and all the debates were very lively. And I extracted just a few messages that we found interesting, and I'm sure that there are plenty of other examples to be given, but this is just our perspectives. There was this talk about the journey for functional areas coming from the fundamentals to execution and momentum, and we found out that functional areas need to fit for purpose, for example, economic, social, and cultural. And of course, this is our promoted theme within the presidency, so we'll take stock of all the ideas that can be extracted, and we are really thankful for this. And even though functional urban areas are not a new concept or a new tool in our community, I think that the seminar proved that there are more opportunities to use them in order to better understand how territories could face challenges like globalization, digital transition, and competitive markets. And I will come back to what our Secretary of State was saying in the opening section, that no one should be left behind. And I think this was kind of confirmed during the seminar, because it was said that no matter where, the place where people live or people work, they matter, and territory matters. All territories matters, and We also found this idea of kept behind places instead of left behind places, and the fact that the regional inequality is too politically dangerous to ignore. These are really very relevant for the Romanian space, so we will try to make use of the lessons learned. So one more point I would like to say about the turnout. Coming after the largest ever seminar in Vienna, we were kind of fearing, with the venue being so close to the borders of the EU and in a much less accessible city, that the rate of participation would be not as high. And well, it was not as high in Vienna, but there were, however, roughly 200 persons attending the seminar, and it really raised a lot of interest. Even now we are in the closing session and the room is almost full. So this shows that, I think that this shows that ESPON is reaching out more and more, and I think this is a good sign for the program. Finally, from the presidency as your hosts, I hope that you enjoyed your stay in Romania so far, and for those of you who will remain a couple of days more, I hope it will be just as enjoyable. I am not from Iași, so maybe I am not so biased. I found the city lovely and lively, with a great atmosphere, and I hope you found the same. It was our pleasure to have you here, so we hope it was your pleasure to be here as well. So, and that you will come back to Romania to visit our country. So, thank you. Well, there were some slides about the conclusions of the activity of the presidency, but I summarized it. So
okay.
No more.
All right, thank you very much. Then Ilona, over to you.
Well, thank you. I hope you enjoyed the seminar. I hope you enjoyed the city. I'm happy to see that at the end of day 2 you feel more informed and more inspired. This is a very good sign for us. We're really happy to see that. And I have to say that we from the side of ESPON, we also feel more informed and more inspired to continue our work on the subject of the functional areas, because this is a subject that really deserves to be explored more and to be discussed even more. And we see that really there is a future in debating the development opportunities and the different practices that have to be aligned at the different functional geographical scales, and to encourage people to work together to promote more territorial cooperation, more place-sensitive policies. So most definitely we will continue working in this direction in the current and also hopefully in the future program. For us in this context, it is very important to understand, as I mentioned, the different policy needs and the different research needs. So I have a small, maybe not a small one, but a homework for all of you. So if you are a policymaker, please send us the information on your policy needs, basically the policy developments that you have that require certain evidence, certain territorial evidence. If you are a researcher, please also send us your research questions, because you working in the field also have a very good understanding, have developed a very good understanding of the data gaps, the research gaps, where you see that more evidence is necessary to support efficient policy making. So we very much hope that you will communicate to us this information that we will use at least in 2 ways. In the current program, we will use it, and it is very important for us to use it in tailoring our outreach activities to the specific target groups, to make sure that our communication is fit for the needs of our stakeholders. And of course, also under the leadership of the managing authority, we are currently also discussing the future program of ESPON post 2020. And also for this debate, it is very important for us to understand what are the research questions and what are your policy needs, to which we should be able to relate the content of the future program. I would also, of course, from my side, would like to say thank you. Thank you to the presidency for hosting this event, also for the lovely dinner. Thank you for also to Iași County Council for having such a beautiful city, which is indeed amazing, and one of the very positive experiences that we have here is also related to the beauty of the place where we are, and I hope you all had an opportunity to enjoy it. I also would like to thank you all for your commitment, your continuous commitment and support to the ESPON program, and also to the implementation of the single operation throughout the years. And then finally, of course, I would like to say thank you to the team of the EGTC, my closest colleagues who have been working hard to prepare this event in cooperation with the Romanian presidency. So, colleagues, thanks a lot for your very professional work, for having everything, for ensuring that the program is running smoothly, and for making our stakeholders happy. And if you are happy, then please let's applaud.
Good work.
I would also like to say special thanks to Laurent. And the reason why I'm saying that is because Laurent has decided to pursue his career elsewhere from September. So he will be unfortunately leaving the GTC. He has been my partner on the job for 3 years, and we have, I think we are losing somebody who is very committed to ESPON, who has contributed a lot to ensuring that we implement the single operation in the most efficient way. And therefore, for me, of course, this is not good news, but I don't want to focus on this part. So I want to focus on Laurent, and of course, on happy for new opportunities that he will have in developing further his career. So we would like to say a big thank you for everything that you have done for us, and of course, wish you good luck in your future endeavors. And at the same time, of course, with this, I am announcing that I am looking for a new head of unit for evidence and outreach. So we will be opening a vacancy basically next week. If you know people, or if you are interested yourselves, we will publish all the requirements, and looking forward to receiving the applications and trying to find somebody as good as Laurent. Yes, and well, finally, we hope to see you all in Helsinki together with the Finnish presidency. And meanwhile, we will do our best to find a venue for this event. So, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy lunch. Enjoy the city. The wonderful experience that we have here is truly amazing. And I would also, of course, like to thank John for your professional moderation, very efficient moderation, very pragmatic moderation. And thank you for cooperating with us as well. So thank you and enjoy the day.
Right then, so that then draws everything to a close. The final announcement organizationally from me is that the lunch is at the same place today as it was yesterday. So you have the same procedure either via the lifts or out down to floor 0 for the lunch. That draws everything to a close. So thank you very much for your participation. And actually, Laurent has one more thing he needs to say. Go on. Sorry?
Just to say that the research partner meeting will be in the Mozart room, which is right next door here. So after lunch, we're starting at 2 o'clock.
Okay. Oh, well, sorry, more? Oh, right, okay. wait, there's more.
For the ECP meeting, I will kindly ask those who are interested, if they don't want to find their own way, they can be right in front of the entrance here. So after the Mozart, almost where we had the family photo yesterday, just go there. You will meet Amalia, the Romanian ECP, whom I hope everyone in participating knows. And she will take you there. It's a 5-minute walk up to the venue. Okay.
Okay. Right then. Lunch, folks.